Beautiful scenery surrounded this incredibly beautiful village, which housed an orphanage. The little girl who ran to the village elder immediately attracted his attention. He was interested in what brought the little girl to him. The little girl stood right in front of the village elder, wanting to give him something. She was bold and willful. Holding the waiver of the money that her father had paid, she asked the village headman to sign it. After reading what was written on the piece of paper, the village elder laughed at what a caring daughter this man had. But her father had already promised to donate money, so they were unlikely to be able to change anything, the headman claimed. The little girl became quiet. She understood that the old man was unlikely to agree to her conditions, so she decided to use a secret method. With her hands clasped in front of her, the little girl began to look sweetly at the headman, asking for the first time this year to cancel the fee. Those eyes and that voice pierced the village elder's heart, so he couldn't refuse the little girl's request. So the happy girl ran across the meadow, holding in her hands a paper that canceled the first installment. In the end, no one can resist the pressure of this face's cuteness. The mission was accomplished. In short, her father is too kind, and this is the root of all troubles. Looking at the paper, she still could not believe that her father donated so much money to the village. He literally gave away a fortune from some noble family to a tiny village. Instead of giving away money, it would be better to buy land, build a house, hire servants, and go on a trip with your daughter. And still, this little girl loved her daddy very much, so she decided that she would look after him more carefully. Seeing people coming to meet her, the little girl greeted them, and they asked if she had bought a new dress. But the little girl answered negatively, because her beloved daddy sewed it for her. Her name was Sian. Her eyes were like two lowlands of a pure summer meadow, hair so fluffy that it resembles cotton candy, and also plump and ripe apples, cheeks that you just want to bite. A truly charming baby. I completely forgot to add that the world around the novel she had not finished reading during her lifetime is called Melody's Life, a fantasy story about the adventures of Saint Melody, who lived her life in trials and struggle for her freedom. But in this story, the main character is not a saint or even a princess, but a very ordinary girl living with her kind father in a very ordinary, quiet village. At first, she felt uncomfortable in a child's body. Everything was so unusual, especially after adulthood. But after a while, the heroine got completely accustomed and more to the life of this world. Those who gave her a new life made sure that she had no opportunities at the start. For example, Sienna often noticed that she spoke like a child, although her actual age was far from childish. However, she really enjoyed her life and hoped every day that her father would come home from work early. However, there were many downsides. One of them was that the child's body quickly got tired, so Sienna often wanted to sleep. Sitting on a stone fence, the little girl noticed knights in armor approaching her. They came up to ask if there were any adults at home, to which the little girl could not immediately answer with confidence. But the men immediately decided to say that they were looking for a male person with red eyes and black hair. These uncles were very suspicious to Sienna, so she decided to immediately tell them that there was no such adult here. She immediately realized that it was about her father. If you were to describe Sienna's father, he was the kindest man in the world. The most sincere, honest, and good, that's to describe it briefly. Sienna loved her father very much. He wasn't some rich or well-groomed guy, just an ordinary worker who went out to the fields every day. That's why her father was so often cheated out of money. He's the type of person who will always take on someone else's debt. Could it be that her father had gotten himself into such a big mess that they had sent a whole squad of knights after him? Sienna looked at the men suspiciously and thought about how she could make them leave quickly. But they decided to say that they came here on a tip, wanting to clarify the exact location. Sian was a smart girl after all, an adult in a child's body, so she immediately pretended to be a child who knew nothing. They froze, dumbfounded, so amazed by this innocent beauty that even Sian herself did not believe that it worked. She continued to play the innocent child to cement her success, so to speak, so she did not let go of their hearts. After such an attack of cuteness, it was visible even through the armor how the knights were struck by it. Sian was so happy to be complimented so much that she started jumping for joy. But in her heart, she laughed sarcastically, since these knights did not know that they had fallen into her cunning trap, so she was able to save Daddy. And the knights no longer knew what to do. Apparently they would have to turn around and go back. Later, Sian decided that she would definitely find out what her daddy got himself into, then she could figure out how to protect him. Even if her father is involved in something serious, she will not back down and will stand in his defense like the most dangerous beast. Suddenly, while she was sitting on the fence, someone called her name and she turned around to find out who it was. It was her dad, a few meters away, seeing his little daughter already calling her by name so that she would run to him. But now was not the best time, since the knights had not yet left, so she began to rage, asking him to come back. The father was all in sweat. He was in such a hurry to get to his daughter that he didn't just walk towards her, he ran. The suspicious men had almost left. They were just looking for a man who matched her father's description. Grabbing his daughter and pressing her to his chest, he immediately began to find out who these knights were and what they were doing here. Sian was already prepared, because she was already thinking about how she would punish those who offended her dad with her flaming fist. But the situation took an unexpected turn of events, because one of the knights, who was in charge, put his hand to his chest and bowed. They came to deliver a message to Mirmad's first heir, his lordship Matthias, the knight said with a bow. The message was, "Stop your games and return home." The little girl was shocked by this news. She couldn't even understand at first that it was addressed to her father. Having connected all the information she had received in her head, she began to reason about who her father was. After all, the family of the Dukes of Mirmad is the most notorious known family in the Empire. Their duchy, a place where the most heinous crimes, including murder, are committed without any hesitation. She began to think that these uncles were greatly mistaken, since it could not be that her father was somehow connected with the Mirmad family. The father's gaze immediately changed. It became merciless and cruel, and he also replied that he would arrive soon. This just didn't fit into the girl's head. She no longer understood at all who her father really was. Send them all to the scaffold, the scum of the demonic world. Now she thought that certain death awaited them. Her father was executed by order of the imperial family, but the outcome was not the best. After all, she thought that her father's head would be raised to the glory of the empire, proclaiming the end of the Mirmad family. She tried to remember how the carriage in the novel went to something similar. All her thoughts were directed towards the memories of the end of the Mirmad family in the novel that she had read during her lifetime. After all, this was a family of main villains, which everyone hated and feared. There were disagreements even within the family. The struggle for power never stopped, and daily news of someone's death during breakfast was commonplace for them. And so, after some time, she went to the castle of these terrible relatives together with her father. Looking at the starry sky, she hoped that everything would not be as bad as in the original novel. Her father turned to her, wanting to know how Sian was feeling, whether she had gotten sick from the journey. His gaze was so kind and his smile so bright that reality did not fit in her head with the ideas she had about her father up until that moment. But what worried her most was the absence of a character named Matthias in the novel. Considering her father's kindness and naivety, it's possible he's an extra character who was killed before the novel even began. So, after some time, taking her in his arms, the father was already carrying the baby into the palace of the Mirmad family. Sian still thought that her father could never fit into such a cruel family. She assumed that perhaps he was being forcibly returned after his self-imposed exile to the village. After all, he was not the one who could wage an underground war for succession to the throne. She simply could not believe it. Rather, he is the one who willfully yielded power to another, in which case only one end awaited her and his father. Sighing heavily, she didn't know what might await her next. The future was unknown, just like her father's future. Seeing his little girl like this, the father asked what she was thinking about, because he thought there was no reason to worry. Sian didn't know how to answer such a question. What should she say? She looked up, hoping for the best. Sitting at the table, she wondered how they would survive in such a cruel place. Everything was so scary in her eyes. Her father stroked her head harder than usual, thereby distracting her from such gloomy thoughts. Looking at Sian, he assumed that the baby was tired after a long journey, so he suggested that they go and rest. Her father's eyes were filled with kindness and care, and at that moment, Sian was still trying to think of a plan to save them. In this world, she lived like an ordinary village girl, and everything was much simpler, but now everything is different. Sometimes she caught crayfish and didn't think about the fact that some killer could set her on fire. And sometimes I dreamed of meat stew for dinner before. I had no thoughts about surviving in the castle of the Mirmad family. But she was left with no choice. Being a time traveler living a second life, she was going to use all her experience. To get back the deserved ending, a happy life with Daddy, that's what she decided for herself. So, turning to her father and looking into his eyes, she confidently said that she would protect him at any cost. The doors of the hall will open and release a generation of cruel and dangerous villains who will want to kill her and her father. Clinging to her daddy, Cien didn't feel any fear, as she was already living her second life. Father smiled sweetly and laughed and said that Cien didn't need to think about protection. He was trying to calm her down. He continued to stroke her head, only now so gently that it was unbearably pleasant. Matthias tried to calm his child in this way. "Daddy will protect his baby himself," he said, hugging her tighter, not wanting to let her go. In the village, their life was moderate and calm, so calm that Cien fell asleep in her father's arms almost every day. Daddy never left his baby. Every day he played with her outside. He tried to express his love in every touch, because she was his most precious treasure, his only treasure. Her father's warm arms, holding her securely against his broad chest, were a fortress for Sienna. Perhaps it was because of long hours of work in the fields that his hands had become so large and his shoulders so broad, the little girl wondered. They even showed blue boxer's veins. Although Matthias had never been a boxer, all these were marks of his hard life. That's why Cien kept repeating that she would protect her dad. It was so funny for Matthias to hear something like that, from a little girl who couldn't really speak yet. His heart was filled with happiness. He could not contain his emotions, so he hugged the baby tighter and tighter. Even though her father teased her, Cien still kept repeating that she could protect her father. Yes, her father often laughed at Cien, but he always wanted a better life for her, his little bundle of joy. Matthias wanted to see Cien strong and healthy, so he asked her to have a carefree childhood. But Cien, looking at her father, understood that she couldn't just let the situation go. She needed to fight. After all, a good dad won't be able to protect her. They are in the very epicenter of a crazy family of monsters. While Cien was thinking about all this, she began to slowly fall asleep, right on her father's chest. After all, when Daddy behaved like that, she had no choice but to give in. That's how much Cien loved him. One day, while sitting at the dinner table, Matthias asked if Cien had eaten her carrots, to which the girl replied in the negative because carrots were not tasty. Matthias immediately started saying that you shouldn't treat carrots like that because the Carrotvilles and Carrot Dills would be upset. Baby carrots, billies, willies, dillies, they will all cry very bitterly if you speak ill of them. So Matthias asked the little girl to apologize to these mini carrots. Sienna then asked if it was necessary. Father Cien was very upset and started crying because the Mercovilles, Morcobillies, and Morcodillis were also upset. The baby didn't want to see her father's tears, so she immediately started eating the baby carrots. She may have looked 5 years old, but this was still her second life. But Dad always repeated the same thing, "Cien, you deserve love. You are so good." This is how almost every day went until Cien realized that this was her father's sincere love and care. And in order for Daddy to always be happy, Cien had to play the role of a little girl who couldn't even speak properly. Suddenly, they heard the loud sound of heels. Someone was confidently approaching them. The atmosphere at the table changed. My father was no longer so joyful and naive. A woman entered the dining room, quite stern in appearance and somewhat resembling Sienna's father. Covering his baby with his hand, Matthias greeted his mother. The woman looked at Matthias with disdain and asked if he considered her his mother. Then he decided to stop at the address. Duchess Rukella. The tension between them was unimaginable. And Sienna was a little scared of it. She didn't understand why the reunion with her mother was so tense. Duchess Rukella, the mistress of the Supreme Mage Tower. In her youth, she killed all the other Padawans and became the sole owner of the tower. Ranked 4th among the 12 greatest mages, Rukella is an extremely talented mage. According to the novel, she is now, so to speak, retired, Sienna recalled. But if they win her favor, then with the support of the Duchess, they will be able to escape from this sinister castle. Sitting down at the table, Rukella immediately said that since Matthias had returned to this estate without permission, he would not be able to leave. Of course, the little girl understood that in this family her father was either the heir or an outcast rejected by everyone. But there was a third option, the most cruel and terrible, the one that Sienna didn't want to think about: a corpse. Matthias knew this better than anyone, so he had no choice but to fight for the place of the family heir. Sienna was already in despair, as she understood that her good-natured father would not be able to take the place of the heir. These thoughts made her so sad and scared that she began to shake and cry, right in Matthias's arms. But gathering her courage, she decided that she would not give in to her feelings and emotions, so her gaze changed. They say that good wit can save you even from a tiger's den, so you couldn't let your guard down. Out of fear, the little girl decided to go on the offensive, so she copied the look of the stern aunt sitting opposite her. Rukella clearly didn't like this. She didn't understand why this little hamster was looking at her like that, so she decided to speak out and call Sienna a sugary honeypot wrapped in rags. It was so rude for Sienna, because all the clothes she wore were made for her by her daddy, with love and care. That's why she decided not to remain silent and say that these weren't rags, but that her daddy had sewn them especially for her. Now Matthias could not remain silent, so he decided to introduce his daughter Sienna to Rukella. And when her father asked Sienna to say hello, she made a small curtsy, saying hello. After this, the little girl began to remember who this Duchess Rukella was, what she liked and how she thought. At first, Sienna was upset that they couldn't leave the castle voluntarily, but now she remembered something very good. This made her incredibly happy, since she knew about the Duchess's further strategy and could predict her every step. The Duchess did not understand why Matthias brought the girl with him, to which the man replied that he wanted to introduce her to the family. Rukella decided to leave all this for later because she needed to say something about the legacy, so she started talking about the trial for the demon incident that Matthias went through. The man's gaze immediately changed. He didn't want to discuss this right now, so he suggested postponing this issue for later. But the little girl, having heard this, already began to think and remember what was in the novel about this. The first time she heard about it, it was apparently from the part she never read. Suddenly, a magical aura began to envelop Rukella, and some kind of attacking magic appeared behind her. Sienna immediately panicked, as she didn't expect an attack so soon. She couldn't prepare for this. But the woman started all this in order to put her arrogant son in his place. Matthias wasn't going to stand aside either. His eyes lit up. He was ready for this attack. Sienna knew that the Duchess did not like to be interrupted, so she believed that this was a mistake on her father's part. At this rate, they won't escape, but will only become a snack for crows. By the way, crows are the smartest birds. But this was the image of the gallows that Sienna had already drawn in her head, a rather joyful image. Everyone should have it like that. The little girl couldn't allow this to happen, so she had to pull an ace out of her sleeve. Her sleeves clearly weren't the biggest. Getting off their hands, deciding to take everything into her own hands, she stopped the adults with her behavior, because all attention was focused on her. Asking her dad to wait a minute, Sienna prepared to give her speech. The father's gaze immediately changed. He did not understand what his little girl was doing, so he began to ask questions. While the little girl was walking to the place, Rukella also began to ask what the honeypot was about. So Sienna quickly ran up to the old woman. Perhaps she shouldn't have called her that, but alas, age. With her sweet face, Sienna tried to charm her grandmother, wanting to melt her cold and cruel heart. Mattis immediately stood up from his seat and began to run excitedly towards the little girl, because it was unknown what could happen to her now. Since this is Daddy's mother in front of her, that means she is Sienna's grandmother, the little girl asked, looking at the woman with an innocent look. But with a smile on her face, she was glad to meet him, but the ace, like the sleeves, was not too big. However, the girl believed that she could charm such a cruel woman, so she did not give up her attempts. Their gloomy castle in 1 second turned into a cute house of a princess who charms everyone with her face. This super attack should have worked, Sienna asked to look at her from head to toe. But the woman darkened and fell silent for a few seconds. There was such a deathly silence that it was unclear whether Sienna Rukella liked it. With an icy, expressionless gaze, Rukella contemplated the ruins of the Thieves' Guild that had just been destroyed by her own hands in the place of the torn space. It seemed that there was no sign of life left. However, contrary to prejudice, the Duchess allowed several souls to be saved. She helped the children to hide unnoticed in the tunnels of the secret passage. No one in Mirmod knew about this gesture of goodwill. The ruthless head of the magic tower showed mercy to the children, who would have thought, but it was said on one of the pages of the novel. And if Sienna's assumptions are correct, then the Duchess has a weakness for children. Of course, all children without exception are terrified at the sight of Duchess Rukella. However, this was a real chance for Sienna to melt the heart of the ruthless woman, and she seized it. The little girl, with a smile on her face, asked if her grandmother was sad without her. This was how she tried to tie her grandmother to herself. But the ruthless woman did not flinch. Not a single muscle on her face moved. It seemed the ace in the hole never worked. So, Sian was horrified because she expected a completely different reaction. Her cute face could always reach the heart. The night was deep and quiet, but the light was burning in all the windows of the castle. The woman said that she was the supreme ruler of the magic tower, and no one was allowed to address her so familiarly. Sian was scared and realized what situation she was in, and the situation was terrible. She became so desperate that she fell to the floor. It turns out that her charm cannot charm everyone. Time for a strategic retreat. At least she was able to buy time for Dad. That's already a small victory. Suddenly, the woman began to laugh, imperceptibly, but in such a way that the little girl understood it. The Duchess was amused by how awkward Sian was in communication, in the bad sense of the expression. For the first time in her life, someone scolded Sian. It was unusual for her and quite offensive. So, standing in front of the woman with a sad face, Sian asked for forgiveness for her clumsy behavior. Rukella narrowed her eyes and looked again carefully at the pot of honey in the rags, as she called Sian. She noted that no one had shown such insolence towards her for a long time. Many could not look her straight in the eye. Coming closer and taking his baby in his hand, Matthias asked his mother to refrain from commenting. Already holding her in his arms, Matthias decided to tell her that he would take Sian to her chambers, to which Rukella did not react in the best way. He interrupted Rukella once again, but this time the woman was not angry, so the little girl wondered. While her father carried her in his arms to her chambers to rest, she could not help but wonder why her grandmother had not separated. Then, grabbing Matthias's shirt tighter, Sian decided to try her super attack again. And with a sweet face she said, "Grandma, see you tomorrow." So she tried once again to melt the heart of the ruthless woman. This time, Rukella didn't scold Sian for being so familiar. She simply remained silent, which surprised the girl. Now, already walking on her own feet, Sian clenched her little fist, as she was sure that next time everything would definitely work out. Matthias, meanwhile, was paying attention to everything, for example, how the servants addressed Sian. And Rukella noted that the baby had grown a lot. She remembered the day when Sian was just born. The hair, the facial features, even this naivety. The girl was a copy of her mother, the ruthless woman noted. Matthias was furious at these words, as he did not want the family to touch his daughter. These words seemed funny to Rukella, since she knew that as soon as the childishness of childhood was cleared from Sian's head, she would immediately leave the castle. But Matthias was not going to back down, and asked not to forget about his character. He was not as naive as his daughter imagined him. Rukella knew Matthias too well, so he was the one she needed to play the role she needed. The dead woman and the daughter he had protected for over 5 years, hiding his northern character. Matthias lost almost everything, but not the most valuable. He simply could not become fierce and ruthless. Rukella approached her son, wanting to remind him of his place, and not only. After all, Matthias had many enemies, both within and outside the family, and he had to thank his devilish eccentricity. Standing in front of his mother, Matthias insisted that he would not lose to anyone, his voice filled with confidence and steadfastness. Clenching his fist, he couldn't afford to lose, especially when his daughter was in this castle. Rukella understood everything, so she patted Matthias on the shoulder and announced that she would prepare for the succession ceremony. Typically, in medieval fantasy, the image of a maid is something like this, docile and kind. They serve food, sweets, and completely obey their mistress, wanting to fulfill all her wishes. They also have all the necessary skills for tea ceremonies, since ladies often conduct them. In general, it is paradise and bliss, but this is only an idealization of the image of maids in novels. But in this novel, everything was different, so much so that the little girl herself did not expect it to see it. To read it is one thing, but to feel it all on yourself is completely different. Sian felt uneasy when she first encountered it. The maid's rough voice scared her. In this castle, they were at the highest level, only their biceps sparkled, and their forms were almost bursting from the size. The backs were incredibly wide and muscular. Bodybuilders could clearly rest here. After all, these cyborg killer maids were ready to tear everyone to pieces for their mistress. As expected, the bloodthirsty maniacs' maids are on a whole other level, but maybe that's only a plus. The time for getting to know each other was over, and now the maids had to lead Lady Sienna to the spire. What is a spire? Worst-case scenario, the northern spire of the Duchy of Mirmod, a place historically used for the execution of criminals, as well as for the last days of criminals. In short, the place is not the best. There are a lot of hanged people and crows that ate human corpses. Walking to this terrible place, all Cian could think about was that they most likely wanted to kill her father. She was concerned that poor and naive Daddy Cian didn't suspect anything, so she needed to come up with an escape plan as soon as possible. Running up the stairs, she felt that she had to get rid of this shadow of death hanging over their family. There were so many steps that one could die from this alone. If only there was an elevator, it would be much easier. Realizing that she couldn't walk any further, Cian decided to use her seductive skills and ask the maids to carry her. But they were unwavering. Because a healthy mind resides in a healthy body, the maids were proud of their physical fitness, and therefore could not allow a frivolous attitude towards their health. Poor Cian had to climb all 10,000 steps on her little legs' hellish duchy. Having reached her room and almost throwing off her horses, Cian still managed to cope with this task, which the maids were proud of. Cian's room was not like the princess's, or rather it was far from it, lots of cobwebs, a bird's nest on the window, in general terrible living conditions. And it made her feel a little hot inside. Of course, after such a difficult climb, she wanted to have a nice rest. But there was nothing here. While Cian was burning, the maid congratulated the little girl on having completed her daily quota of 20,000 steps. Cian kept thinking that this was some kind of torture. Nothing, not even her father's protection, would make her give in to her pride. Therefore, she concluded that these maids were definitely in cahoots with her father's enemies, starting to remember them in the novel. But first she needed to get out of this ill-fated hovel. She did not give up hope that she would succeed. Suddenly, she noticed that all her hands were dirty because she was holding the dirty door handle, so to speak. Yes, my hands were not only covered in dust, but also old rust, since the door handle was metal. This horror made the little girl stop for a second. She needed to realize what had just happened, because this was the first time something like this had happened in her life. And this time, she thought, gave her strength, as she was able to find what she had been looking for so long. Looking at the nest of yellow birds, the little girl was already making plans to escape, or at least trying to do so. The village is the village, the very place where Cian could relax and not think about having to fight for her life. She rested peacefully when she was sick, and her father looked after her, wanting to help. Seeing how worried her father was, Cian calmed him down and tried to send him off to rest. But Daddy couldn't leave his baby. He wanted to sleep with her and take care of her. The little girl apologized for being sick so often, and it was clear that Cian's father was uncomfortable with these words. He blamed himself for not being able to find the right words, for always seeming so careless. Cian couldn't speak properly, so all she did was communicate with her daddy through sounds. She was so shocked by what Dad had done for her that he stood in front of Cian and asked if she was feeling better. Matthias heard somewhere that the fruits of this tree are good for health, so he planted them for his daughter. Palm trees. Yes, I must remember. The man asked his daughter not to get sick anymore and to live happily. After this, like anyone else, Cian was incredibly happy. So, from sweet and pleasant memories, we return again to this castle of the so-called villains. Showing off their muscles, the maids advised doing stretching exercises while taking a bath, which is actually useful, since the muscles and ligaments are warmed up, and rest only takes away precious mass, which is already difficult to gain, and bodybuilders stubbornly eat it up. The funniest thing is that the maids who were filling the bathtub were asking each other about their muscles the whole time. After some time, the bath was filled, the maids stopped showing off their muscles, but they still talked about that magic powder that helps muscles grow faster. Local fruit of the Yggdrasil, protein, super source of protein, and a world idol for sports fanatics. For the little ones, the cuties. An example of how it actually works. Here's before and here's after. People save up for years to buy this miraculous protein, and the maids' salaries are actually small. Cian entered the room and asked if the bath was already filled, and upon hearing a positive answer, the maid said that she would help the baby undress. As expected, these maids don't care about the girl's cuteness. They only thought about their sculpted bodies. Well, as they say, a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, a muscle for a muscle. So Cian decided to use the power of compliments and started praising their biceps and triceps. But the overgrown maids began to modestly thank the young lady for those who loved themselves so much. They were too modest. Sian didn't let go of the moment and continued to ask if it was possible to become as strong in her village. So I started telling them about some things for sports. Or maybe it was medicine. Well, I finally remembered it was some kind of tree powder. The jock maids looked at each other. How could it be otherwise? It couldn't be otherwise. They were jocks after all. At first, Sian didn't understand the maids' strange reaction to her words. They literally froze. But he realized that Sian continued to say that she had a lot of flour from palm fruits, cunningly outplayed them. At that moment, Matthias went to explore the place where his little daughter had been placed. As expected, he concluded that this was not the best place for Sienna. As he climbed the stairs, he realized that this place was very high and dangerous. Moreover, the rumors circulating about the local maids, the Cerberuses of the Northern Tower, were quite dangerous for the little girl. Entering the room, Matthias asked how Sian was feeling. He wanted to check out the situation. This tiny baby was surrounded by such huge women who didn't even look like them. Matthias's gaze changed. He began to suspect that maybe someone had already placed an order for his daughter. But the little one was happy. She took a bath with a smile on her face and enjoyed her time. After all, these jock maids began to worship her like an idol, dreaming of that very powder. The father, seeing this picture, could not believe his eyes. How his 5-year-old daughter was able to subdue such tough jocks. He had no idea how Sian had subdued them. The man thought that the girl had captivated the maids with her charm, but everything was much more interesting. Ta-da! Welcome to the theater of the imagination of Matthias, where his daughter amazes everyone with her cuteness. In fact, this was the most interesting manipulation of the little girl, where she promises to bring a lot of this powder to the maids. Here it is, the addiction. Daddy, of course, didn't know about this, but he was glad to see his child happy. Now he is calm. Coming closer, Matthias asked if Sian had already made friends with everyone, but upon seeing her daddy, she immediately ran up to him. And she answered positively, but she also wasn't going to leave her daddy alone, so she agreed to sleep with him. A joyful Matthias invited Sian into his room, asking her to say goodbye to her friends. Seeing Prince Matthias in such a mood, the maids were stunned because he was unrecognizable. And the little girl, with a smile on her face, addressed the maids as if they were her sisters. The jock maids immediately lost all their strength, fearing Prince Matthias, who had quietly threatened them. After saying goodnight to the bodybuilding sisters, Sian and Matthias went to his room to sleep together. And the little girl kept thinking about how naive the maids were. Who else here was naive, of course, was unknown. When Dad planted those coconut fruits, Sian had no idea about their properties. But after them, all her illnesses disappeared as if by magic. That's why the little girl decided to ask her dad to bring more of those fruits. Eat coconut. Children, you will be big and healthy. Sian lay down on her father's chest and slowly began to fall asleep with a smile on her face. Sian couldn't get her head around the fact that her father was the Prince of Mirmod. It must have been hard and lonely for him, so he ran away. In the village, doing the hardest and dirtiest work, Matthias seemed so happy. He had a smile on his face every day, because there Matthias was no longer alone, but with his beloved daughter, Sian. In her past life, she couldn't even dream of a family, but in this life, everything is different. So she must do everything to protect her beloved daddy. The Mirmod family's training ground, usually the jock maids would gather there. The knights weren't visible yet. They've already eaten those coconuts and were able to squat 1,000 times, so they're high-level maids. At some point it became unclear what kind of monsters in caps were in front of the little girl, but she could stop them with one hand. After stopping the maids, Sian headed to the garden. The weather was beautiful today, and she thought that there would definitely be other children walking there. Besides her, it was strange where there were other children in this castle. And that's where they came from. They were all guests on an excursion, and Sian ran to them to meet her future classmates. While thinking about how great it would be to have a friend, the little girl didn't notice how other children began to stare at her. But after she caught their gaze on her, she immediately smiled in a friendly manner. But who would have thought that the residents would react to this so negatively, calling Sian ill-mannered? They continued to insult the little girl, considering her an ugly girl from the nobility. Here is the younger generation. The children reacted to her this way because they saw in her signs of the blood of the cursed woman. Also, adults told their children that Sienna's father would soon die. The girl could not feel comfortable in such an atmosphere. Hearing all this, the little girl could not help but become immersed in her own thoughts. All this brought on sadness and melancholy. But it was clear that she was not going to tolerate all this. Her character was tempered, and her gaze was burning. Clearly aware of what was being whispered behind her back, Sian stood meekly, watching the behavior of the other children. While some insulted her father, others talked about how weak and worthless Sian was. Will they really kill her? Will she really not have a chance to survive? Will a sad end await her? Suddenly, warm arms embraced her and called her daughter. At that very moment, a familiar voice gave Sian strength and confidence. She remembered how her father supported and cared for her when she was in so much pain. Looking at Matthias with a soulless gaze, Sian did not understand at first why this man cared about her so much. So much so that he shed tears every time she was in pain. Why was Matthias like this, Sian wondered. Clenching her fist and remembering how much her own father loved her, she could endure such treatment. So she decided to turn to the children who had just insulted her, wanting to find out if that was all. Sian couldn't pronounce words well yet, so the children took advantage of this, wanting to hurt her. They were very interested in who this mudblood, in whom the blood of a cursed woman flows, imagined herself to be. They continued to laugh, provoking the little girl to strong emotions. But the little girl had aces up her sleeve, so she decided to play the role of a silly girl, wondering if the children really called her grandmother an evil woman. And this was the most effective way to put these impudent children in their place. While Sian was dealing with the children, maids were already approaching her, ready to protect her at any second for a portion of protein. The entire palace was filled with name-calling. The girl did not hesitate to use all means of manipulation. The overgrown maids immediately ran up to the girl's scream. They did not understand the reason for such hysteria. The little girl complained to the maids that her grandmother was considered an evil and cursed woman. The other children tried to justify themselves, realizing that they were at a disadvantage, since Grandma Sian was a highly respected woman. But with crystal-clear, innocent eyes, Sian continued to cry and tell what nasty things the children said about her grandmother. In this way, she was able to outplay and destroy all the ill-wishers who thought they had the right to speak like that. One boy couldn't take it anymore and decided to raise his mini fist at Sian, trying to prove that she was wrong. Sian narrowed her eyes, preparing for the blow. Such were the cruel children in this society. They thought that violence was the way out. But the maids didn't allow this, by the way. One fist of this maid looked like the whole body of a child. Covering the baby with her huge body, the maid asked if the lady was okay. How can you even attack someone who is clearly weaker than you, ill-mannered and impudent children? The maid said that Mrs. Rukella would definitely find out about this incident. Seeing all this, the ordinary maids, the same ones from the princess's castle, began to whisper. They could not remain indifferent at the sight of such a weak girl. Sian's heart was breaking just thinking about her grandmother being spoken about in such nasty ways. What a nightmare. Attention, everyone. Critical skill activation. Guess which one? But let's keep it a secret from Granny Sienna. It's a secret. The skill effect is the rapid spread of rumors. That's exactly it, my dears. Thanks to these maids, Sian will be able to notify the entire castle about this incident. The best manipulation of all time, judging by the effect. The Duchess will find out about the incident in 5 or 7 minutes. This is how Sian was able to punish the little rascals for their bad words. As the saying goes, yes, that's right, whoever comes to us with a sword will perish by the sword. Walking with a confident gait, Sian was calm, because no one would speak badly about her father anymore. Now it was time to get myself in order and go to class. An extension to the mansion, as you already understood, this house is huge, and it has its own school. So let's meet the new baby. His name is Leonard. Why he needs a mask is still unclear. Now he attended classes with the daughter of the infamous Duke Matthias. But from his personal observations, this girl seemed to him to be quite an interesting person. All this time he was watching her, standing near a huge oak tree, his stealth skills at a high level. Leonard had secret information and regretted that Sian was going to be eliminated. Sitting right in front of her, he talked about Matthias, who was her father and famous. With his strength, beauty, intelligence, and cruelty, he was the strongest descendant of the Mirmod family, a man ready to cut the throats of even unworthy relatives. Leonard addressed the girl, calling her Chestnut. He didn't know her name, so he decided to ask. Sian corrected the boy, saying that she was not a chestnut. Leonardo was also surprised that Sian was the first child who wasn't interested in his mask. In a sense, this reaction is quite natural, since she may have grown up in an environment where excessive curiosity was punishable. The guy was no slouch, so he immediately noticed how Sian hid her emotions under lock and key. If he were in her place, he would definitely find out everything hiding in someone's shadow is not Leonardo Mirmod's style. If there were to be an obstacle in the path of Duke Matthias's destructive storm, even if it was her own child, she would not be able to escape the blade of his deadly sword. Leonardo began to reflect on how Cien looked. In his eyes, she was small, weak, cute. Oh, no, that's not it at all. Where am I going? Away with such thoughts. You need to think rationally. But he began to talk about Cien's father, because in the Mirmod family, there had never been anyone like Mr. Matthias. Cien showed interest, so she turned her head towards Leonardo. The guy liked the attention. Looking into her eyes, he subconsciously began to think differently. Leonardo could not control it. When she returned to thoughts about who had abused her, a light involuntarily lit up in her eyes. Those sparkling green eyes caused a storm of emotions in the guy, and the raised corners of the mouth which formed a cat-like smile. Having all these signs, Leonardo began to reason. He needed to make the right conclusion. He could tell that Cien smelled of strong hatred and fear, so he asked her if she realized that she could die at any moment. The smile disappeared from the baby's face. Now she no longer looked like a baby. Briefly but confidently, she answered positively, and this was not surprising. But looking at the guy with a confident gaze, she assured him that she would not die. Leonardo did not expect this. He could not even imagine that a child would be able to express his thoughts so clearly. Now everything came together. His piercing blue eyes were absorbed into Cien. This burning desire for life, so strong, Cien Mirmod. Leonardo did not expect anything else from the child Matthias. So, with a smile on his face, he began to wish that Cien Mirmod could survive this cruel war. So they sat in silence further. Cien looked at the guy who, for her, was just smiling, and it looked at the very least strange. She was also interested in what this guy was laughing at so sarcastically, suspiciously. After that, she concluded that the only normal people in this place were Cien and her dad. Before starting her training, Cien tried to get her thoughts in order, but some strange guy spoke to her. She remembered his words when he described Ciena's father. It seemed strange to her. Therefore, I concluded that Dad's kindness was a surprise for this family. And even this little kid in a mask, who still didn't really know how to add 2 and 2, understood that they would die. All this upset Cien. She felt hurt. It seemed like there was no hope for a bright future, but she couldn't come to terms with it. But suddenly, someone's hand touched her shoulder and distracted her from such sad thoughts. Seeing what was happening to the baby, Leonardo decided to ask if everything was okay. Physically, Cien felt fine, but mentally, she felt like she had been pierced by a thorn. The thought of how much her father had endured in this family, how lonely he had been, made the little girl sad. But now everything will be fine, because Cien will be able to protect her dad. She knows the original story of the plot. While the little girl was convincing herself in her head that everything would be fine, Leonardo stood nearby and watched. He felt like he reminded her of something painful from the past. It was time to meet the teachers. The thin one was the instructor for academic matters, and the fat one for discipline. Standing in front of the students, they complimented each other perfectly and also wished good work to everyone who came for the first time. Cien didn't lose her composure and immediately introduced herself, saying that she was the daughter of Prince Matthias. Since she had named a name, she naturally expected the teachers to also name their names. But unfortunately, they were forbidden to share personal information, so they could not say their names. This made Cien a little sad, and also drove away a lot of questions in her head. It was time to start lessons. When the lesson began, Cien was stunned as she didn't understand the level of education of children in this world. To find out more about this, she decided to look at Leonardo's textbooks. And when she saw that there was a multiplication table textbook in front of her, Cien was able to breathe a sigh of relief, as the level of education was the same as in her previous world. But the next student was pragmatism, Epicurean philosophy, and the continuity of geometry. Well, by the way, not so difficult. Unfortunately, Cien didn't even understand what was being discussed. A cognitive moment, my dears. Pragmatism, in simple words, is a person's tendency to evaluate events and phenomena from the point of view of practical benefit. Epicureanism, a philosophical teaching that means the search for happiness through a reasonable attitude to pleasures and sufferings. Its creator, the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus. Seeing all this knowledge that was beyond her control, Cien wondered how smart the children in this world were. But she was sure that she would not look stupid, since this was, after all, her second life. Suddenly, she started to think the opposite, that Cian might be too brilliant. This could lead to problems, so she had to be more careful, although my personal opinion is that she is not in danger. After some time of praising herself, Cian decided to turn to the teachers and ask what they will be doing in class today, making a cute face. The tall and thin teacher was kind, so he decided to suggest that Cian start with a book of fairy tales. The little girl was so happy that it was impossible to describe in words, and the teacher was only too happy to read the story about the rabbit princess with her. But suddenly the second teacher started shouting he thought it was all a bad joke. After all, how the daughters of the Mermaid family can offer to read children's fairy tales is beyond comprehension. The teachers began to argue among themselves, taking completely different positions, and everyone wanted to be right in this situation. At that moment, Cian decided to look at Leonardo, assessing his reaction, but he only meekly shook his head. The teachers stopped, noticing how Cian was acting. They thought it was strange. Upset, she leaned on her hands and began to feel sad, because she didn't know what to do. Seeing this, the teacher decided to take matters into his own hands and suggest that the little girl read the fairy tale after all. Suddenly, a huge book fell on the table, frightening the little girl with its crash. The discipline teacher believed that such tales were usually read to children up to 2 years old, so Lady Cian needed to be taught something more difficult. Everyone knows this, even if Cian lived in a village with zero education. Now this was a provocation to which Cian could not react, and this thick book was about etiquette. Thinking that she was being looked down upon, she slapped her small hand on the book, and she said that Cian would read it. Even if it looked very difficult, she could handle it. So the whole day passed, and it was almost evening. The school day was drawing to an end. The pages of the book turned with amazing speed. No one could have imagined that Cian was capable of reading. But the disciplinary teacher was still disappointed, as he wanted to teach the child of an influential figure and not the disgraced heir. He couldn't allow it to happen that he, the academy teacher, would be made into some kind of nanny. What he gave Cian was not a tough book, but a high-level guide to etiquette. When giving homework, the teacher asked me to read and write a summary of the first chapter. And when Leonardo began to look at him intently, the disciplinary teacher immediately began to mentally humiliate the child. He criticized everything, the way Cian held her pen, her posture. In his eyes, she needed to correct absolutely everything. Looking at his pocket watch, the discipline instructor was already waiting for Cian to start crying. Cian raised her hand and caught the teacher's attention, and he asked what the girl needed, to which Cian replied that she was finished. Surprisingly, the child who was about to start crying, on the contrary, claims that he was finished. The discipline teacher picked up Cian's papers and thanked her for her work, expecting the little girl to have written some nonsense. But when the discipline mentor began to study her work, he was so amazed that his jaw dropped. The study mentor approached his colleague, interested in what had happened, because his colleague had a rather interesting face. When he took the sheets of paper from Cian, he couldn't believe his eyes. Seeing this, Cian didn't understand why the men were acting like this, and when she asked them, the teachers flinched. She started to get nervous, because in her eyes it was the most basic answer, but suddenly it didn't fit into this world. So lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice how the teacher picked her up in his arms and started shouting that she was a genius. She began to feel like something was wrong, so she began to think that maybe she should have written half. But the teacher of discipline was not the same as the teacher of teaching. He did not want to admit it, so he promised that tomorrow he would bring a more difficult book. Leonardo, turning to Cian and calling her Chestnut, attracted her attention. He began to smile as an incredibly pleasant thought entered his head. Sometimes there are things that even difficulties cannot overshadow, and he saw that Cian's talent. The little girl started laughing loudly because she realized that she had failed to hide her skills. The main building of the castle was not as cheerful as the annex for children's education. Rukella's aura was so dark and heavy that it was impossible to think that she was thinking about a pot of honey. But she wanted to know if Cian, who was running around the castle in disgrace, loved her more than her own father. Prince Matthias couldn't believe it. He thought it was some kind of misunderstanding. The man, standing timidly before the gentleman, tried to justify himself because it was not his fault that Madame Cian defended the Duchess. Having learned about this, Mrs. Rukella constantly bullied her son Matthias about it. Although Matthias didn't particularly like it, he noticed how Mrs. Rukella had begun to treat his daughter, and Rukella was also proud of the girl, because her success in lessons became immediately known. Matthias didn't like the old woman bragging about his daughter, so a small conflict arose between them. Well, not small, but big, to be honest. But Rukella decided that the girl deserved the award because she showed herself in the best possible way. You could expect anything from this woman, and her sly smile gave you no peace. Rukella's assistant was shocked that she was going to give such a thing to the baby. Matthias noted that Cian would be delighted with such a gift. She would only be glad to receive such a thing from her grandmother. In their eyes, Cian was a smart girl, but so fragile and tender, she always needed to be protected. She's like crystal, about to break. The same goes for her heart. She's a child who's easily hurt. She doesn't fit in with this family at all. One gets the impression that she would rather point her finger and glare at those who dare to say something wrong to her. Their conversation in Rukel's office was still ongoing. She needed to know about everything that was happening in the castle. And Matthias was informed that the Senate was going to nominate him for the position of Duke. The Senate nomination is a double-edged sword. If the candidate is not yet ready, he will not pass the test. Hearing this, Matthias began to smile sarcastically, as he did not expect that the Senate itself would pave such a path for him. It felt like everyone wanted to finish him off once and for all, so he needed to prepare for a counterattack. Rising from the table, Rukella noted that Matthias was already one step closer to the Duke's place, so she suggested celebrating this with a glass of wine. Although the offer was pleasant, Matthias could not agree, as he knew that Cian was waiting for him. As befits a comedy, the scene changes from a gloomy, dark office to the garden of an estate where lessons have just ended. The ducking maids were already waiting for their mistress, as she had to return to the northern spire immediately. It looked so scary because even her own maids made her feel like a prisoner. The only thing she didn't understand was why Leonardo wasn't afraid of these maids, because they looked so frightening. Leonardo immediately turned to the maids and asked why they couldn't play at least a little. But as it turned out, it was Cian's father, Prince Matthias, who gave the order to bring her straight to the northern spire. And when Leonardo heard about this, he became very scared and nervous. It was strange for Cianna. Leonardo kept asking and asking questions. One of them was whether Lady Cian could have a gift. Cian immediately refused, thinking that the gift from the villain family was a bomb or poison. But Leonardo insisted on his own, because he remembered that Cian wanted to live a long time, and his gift would help her with this. Hearing this, Cian was immediately eager to find out what gift awaited her. She was dying of curiosity. It turned out to be a pendant with a tree branch and 2 wings on it, a thing of incredible beauty. Cian happily accepted such an imperfectly beautiful gift into her small palms. At the same time, they said what the name of this pendant was, the Healing Fairy Medallion. The Fairy Healing Medallion, and although it is a means of summoning ancient fairies, today there are few people capable of this, so the medallions have lost their value. Leonardo believed that even if Shinan failed to summon the fairy, there was some healing power in this medallion that the girl could use. It looked like a simple thing, but if used correctly, this medallion was truly useful. But remembering her father and his kindness, Cian understood that there was no such thing as a free lunch. The only person who helped her for free was her father, so she wondered why Leonardo was helping her. The boy jerked his head, his cheeks turned a little pink. For a while he did not want to say the reason. He lowered his head and continued to think about his answer, not understanding the true reason for his actions. But Leonardo knew he had no choice but to tell her what he felt for the girl. Who wanted to survive so much? So Leonardo decided that it would be boring if the baby died tomorrow. Cian was very surprised because she didn't think that anyone from this family would help her except her father. While the 2 children were chatting sweetly with each other, the overgrown maids showed you their muscles and appreciated you. Cian agreed to accept the gift, so she asked Leonardo to help her put on the locket. Leonardo asked if he could touch Cian, to which the girl responded positively. But Leonardo thought that this was not possible, because he could accidentally curse Cian with his touch. So he turned to the maid, asking her to put the medallion on Cian. The maid immediately agreed to carry out the order. So after some time, the clasp of the pendant was fastened around Cianna's neck. Since she gained some healing power, her survival rate increased by 1 point. Thinking about how sweet Leonardo was, Cian thanked him with a smile on her face. Leonardo never expected that someone would ever thank him so sincerely, so he was touched. Unexpectedly, Cien turned to the boy, wanting to know his name because now they were friends. Apparently, she forgot that they already knew each other. Leonardo laughed at this because in this family, he could never consider anyone his friend. Shyly and timidly lowering his gaze, the boy introduced himself to Cien again. His name is Leonardo. Cien was very surprised, as she remembered this name when she read the novel. Now she knew who was standing in front of her. But having decided to ask again, and having confirmed that the boy's name was Leonardo, she ran up to him. If his name is Leonard, is he really the famous character from the novel The Life of Melody? The same one, in the future known as the Mad Dog Mermaid. The boy wondered if there had ever been a relatively normal person in this family. Cecil, the wanted criminal, turned out to be a surprisingly nice person. Suddenly, a girl ran up to him and asked if his name was Leonardo. He was the most important person in Melody's life. The girl realized that this boy was Mad Dog Mermaid. Her face instantly changed, and she noted with mock surprise how cool his name sounded. Leonardo, rubbing his nose, thought that this was the first time he had heard such words, and this made him a little embarrassed. The girl thought he looked like a puppy, perhaps because of his young age. He literally wagged his tail with joy that he had just been praised. Sienna continued to think that Leon looked very cute and couldn't understand why he became a villain. Leon looked down, surprised that he was called cute, and the girl immediately thought that she said something wrong. The boy remembered that before this he had only been called pathetic. Realizing this, the girl thought about what kind of life he had, and it was no wonder that he became Mad Dog. Now Leon was almost stupidly naive and helpless. Sienna instantly realized that they had become friends and thought it was the perfect time to win Leon over to her side. The boy sheepishly offered his new friend some tea, and she immediately agreed. As the girl began to call Leon to come along, she was suddenly lifted up from behind. It turned out that Sienna's father had arrived and looked at the boy with suspicion, taking his daughter in his arms. Sienna happily told her father that she had made a friend named Leonard. Seeing the faces of the maids, the girl thought that something had happened to them, assuming that their protein levels had dropped. The man, covering the girl with his hand, looked angrily at the little boy. Then he began to tell Leon what he should do now. The man threatened that the boy was obliged to take care of the wall. Leon, with fear in his eyes, promised that he would take care of the girl. At this time, Sienna was sitting at the table reading a book and thinking about something. The book told the story of a beautiful saint who appeared like a comet and who genuinely cared for the common people. The girl read only half of the novel, but the love story of the crown prince and the saint constantly encountered difficulties. The book featured 3 main villains leading the heir's struggle for the right to inherit the throne. Delphine Mermaid, the adopted daughter of Duchess Rukella, was currently studying in the north. The most dangerous of all was considered to be the dark magician Axel Mermaid. Axel Mermaid won the Battle of the Heirs and became the Iron Duke, turning the empire into a kingdom of horror. Luckily, she hasn't met the infamous trio yet, but when that day comes, she must be strong enough to face them head-on. At the moment, the key figures were the Duchess, the director, and the chairman of the board. The girl felt that she didn't have enough information about the Senate chairman, so she decided to hold off on drawing conclusions for now. She also knew that a trap would soon be set, and to deal with it, she would need strength, as well as an understanding of how to use the necklace. To do this, the girl needed to get into the treasure trove of information, but due to her young age, she would hardly be allowed there alone. After that, she shouted loudly that she wanted to see her father, and confidence was visible on her face. At this time, Matthias's servants reported that they had already finished. The man decided to target the core of the Senate first, since he had already hired all the mages. He also stated that people who dared to harm his daughter would simply die at his hands. Suddenly, the man ordered the servant to take off his hat immediately. The boy touched his headdress in bewilderment and asked why it was needed. Then he turned to the Lord with fear in his eyes, asking what was the matter. The man, with a smile and a slight mockery, replied that it would be nice to plant some potatoes. He said he was thinking about creating a garden under the spire and asked how much such a project would cost. The servant replied that it would cost about 10 gold pieces, which surprised the man, who was not yet familiar with city prices. At that moment, a little girl ran into the room and demanded that they stop. Sienna stated that potatoes were very cheap now, and 10 gold pieces were more than enough. The servant began to get nervous and tried to somehow justify himself, but then the man called his daughter by name. With a puppy-like expression, he said that the girl shouldn't be so distrustful of people. Then Sienna climbed onto her father's table and began to tell him that there were a lot of bad people in the world now. She then turned to the servant and sternly ordered him never to appear near her father again. Having heard all the threats, the young man ran away in fear. So convincingly the girl had frightened him. After this, Sienna said that things couldn't be left as they were, and told them to listen carefully. The girl began to show on her face how to lower her eyebrows and squint her eyes. Then, stamping her foot, she added that a man should do the same. After finishing her show, the girl spat on the floor and explained to her father that this was exactly how he should behave. Sienna convinced her father that if he did this, no one would dare to deceive him again. At that moment, the father, with tears in his eyes, asked his daughter how she knew about this. Sienna realized she had gone too far and realized she had scared her father, not knowing what to say. Then the girl came closer and assured her father that there was no need to be afraid because she would hug him tightly. During the hug, the father thought about how many problems this family had brought and how his kindest daughter had been brought to such a state. With a serious expression on his face, the man gloomily stated that it was necessary to restore order here. Sienna pulled back and asked, confused, what Dad meant by cleaning. The man hesitated a little and replied with a smile that he was thinking about making strawberry syrup with his daughter. Hearing this, Sienna said that she liked her dad's cooking, but asked him not to be distracted by other thoughts when she spoke. When the father picked up his daughter, she suddenly remembered that they first needed to go to the library. The girl was full of determination and thought about how to find a way. Sienna brought a lot of books from the library, but they weren't very useful. At that moment, a man approached her and asked with disdain if Lady Sienna was reading this book, after which he added that he doubted the girl's ability to understand what was written. Embarrassed, Sienna stood up and, trying to reach the book, insisted that she was able to understand its contents. Suddenly, she twisted her finger and a sharp pain pierced her entire body. The man just clicked his tongue and remarked that she should hold herself more gracefully. With tears in her eyes, Sienna exclaimed that her teacher was very angry and did not understand her at all. After some time, they were sitting together with Leon, and the girl complained to him that the teacher seemed to really hate her. The boy asked her if she knew that he worked under the director of the academy. Leon also said that there are rumors that no child survives if they become the principal's target. Sienna asked in surprise if these children were being killed. Leonard explained that the principal uses a ghost maze on his students. The boy explained that this illusion was so scary that an ordinary child would go crazy at the sight of it. So he asked the girl to be careful because someone might want to harm her father, and then she would become the first target. After this, Leon asked if he had scared her with his words, to which the girl replied that this was not the case. At this time, a certain young man was watching the night and was amazed at what he had actually done. When the girl approached him, she immediately informed him that Lord Matthias had left the tower to undergo the test of the air. The girl added that it would not be difficult for her to put the maid to sleep, since she was able to put the knight to sleep. The young man said that he had heard that the maids here were quite unusual. They saw in the distance tall and impressive men in maids' costumes with extremely serious faces. The masked men decided to use a special sleeping gas that could put even an elephant to sleep in a matter of seconds. When they applied it, they immediately realized that it didn't work, and this left them confused. The masked men instantly realized that these were not maids, but real monsters. However, they were storm warriors who specialized in combat. When the attack began, the maid immediately pushed the masked girl back. The men thought that these masked people were weaker than small fish and did not understand why they had entered here. When they tried to interrogate them, they accidentally knocked them out, and now they had to wait for the masked men to come to their senses. Then they brought them to the wall, and the girl politely asked the ladies what it was. The girl wondered if they were companions for afternoon tea, although they looked more like murderers. When the girl asked if Leonid was okay, the maids were happy that Lady Sienna was taking care of them. Then the girl just wondered if it was okay to beat people like that. After this, she asked to untie the prisoners' mouths and give them a chance to hear their story. When the masked men could speak, they immediately began to shout about injustice. They claimed that they had come to see the mistress after hearing about her, and that the maids had attacked them without reason. They said they wanted to quickly get an autograph and leave quietly without disturbing anyone. The maids began to object, but Sienna stopped them, saying that she understood everything. The girl asked the masked men if they had been sent to kill or kidnap her, suggesting that the director was behind it. The masked men looked at each other, not knowing what to answer. Suddenly, one of the maids announced that Lady Sienna had received a message. The letter stated that the author had heard about her successful adaptation to life in the Mirmod family. However, after careful consideration, the Academy found it difficult to determine whether the girl was suitable for the role of mistress of the Mirmod household. Therefore, a small test will be conducted under the supervision of the director. After reading the letter, Sienna asked for help, as she needed to leave the house immediately. At that moment, the maid, with a grin, announced that the item the girl had asked for was in the purse and began to hand it over. Sienna immediately thought that with her secret weapon, she was fully prepared for the test. As the girl was about to leave, the maid asked her if she was sure she wanted to go alone. Sienna replied that she needed to sort out some things on her own, so she should go alone. After some time, the little girl opened the tall doors and greeted loudly. The gray-haired man greeted her and asked with a grin if she had said goodbye to her exiled father. Sienna objected that her father was not an exile and not stupid at all, thinking to herself that the only stupid one here was the director. The man waved his hand, saying that he was sure she had already been told about the test. The test will take place in a ghostly labyrinth, and the task is to simply get out of there. The man told the girl that if she really was the daughter of a great man, then it would not be difficult for her. Seeing this, Sienna immediately realized how the man was checking all the children and asked if she had the right to choose. The girl thought that a man should not expect her to play by his rules. The director reflected on the fact that the girl was walking straight into the jaws of death without realizing it and could end up dying. This scared Sienna a little, but she decided to go all the way and not give up. The director continued to say that in their family, the weak were immediately devoured, and he saw Sienna trembling like an aspen leaf. She bowed her head, not knowing what to answer, and this made the director very happy. Suddenly, Sienna reached for the crystal and said that until she tried it, she wouldn't know how it would end. The man looked at the girl in shock, thinking that he couldn't smile in such a situation. The illusion spell was considered one of the most dangerous in the world and could seriously harm a person. This labyrinth touched on a person's darkest fears and brought painful memories to light. Knowing this, the man only suffered more from the anticipation of what was lurking in his head. When the test began, the girl immediately felt that the air in her memories was completely different. She walked through a ghostly labyrinth in complete darkness. Sienna decided to move forward and not look back under any circumstances. The road narrowed and the girl could no longer walk normally, let alone run. Suddenly she saw a light ahead and thought that this could be the exit. She decided that this might be the end, but her experience in the labyrinth did not match what they told her at all. Suddenly she heard voices addressing her, saying that she was nothing but trouble and that no one would love someone like her. The girl froze in a stupor because this voice was very familiar to her and inspired fear. Memories of her past life flashed before her like a film strip, preventing her from continuing on her way. She saw her parents yelling at each other because the child was too slow. The 8-year-old girl hid in the corner during their arguments, and this happened constantly and became commonplace. At some point, she thought that she would quickly go get some water and immediately return to the room. As she walked with a glass of water, she heard one of the parents say that they should get a divorce, and one of them would take the child. The mother screamed indignantly and added that she would never take her away. The father asked what she wanted, because he couldn't give her to an orphanage. The woman screamed that Sienna was like her, so he would have to deal with her himself. At that moment, the girl realized that she had been abandoned, and there was only emptiness in her eyes. When one of them again shouted at the other to do whatever he wanted, the girl's mug fell out of her hands out of fear. Hearing the sound of a breaking mug, the parents looked at the little girl with anger. The woman began to ask if the girl knew how much such a mug cost. At this point, the man asked if the little girl was trying to throw a tantrum to get pity. These words were cold as ice and very frightening to the little defenseless girl. Mom and Dad were serious, and the girl sincerely believed their words. The man reproachfully said that the girl couldn't even speak normally and then looked away. At that moment, the mother shouted that if the girl continued to be such a burden, she would simply kill herself. Sienna, with fear and tears in her eyes, began to call for her mother, and then the woman became even more angry because she did not want to be called that. The woman started shouting that the girl was useless and couldn't even speak normally. When the little girl tried to run away, she tripped over a broken mug and blood instantly appeared on her feet. She fell to her knees and thought about how much pain she was in, but she didn't say a word. Only words of farewell came from her lips, and her body trembled with fear. The man began to ask why the girl was sitting on the floor and crying, and threatened that she should at least remove the glass. Then Sienna said that her hands were cut and they hurt a lot. At that moment, the man shouted at the girl not to call him father, which scared her very much. He continued to say that such a useless creature could not be his child. The girl was in unbearable pain. She desperately wanted to be noticed and taken care of. At this time, the director watched her and laughed because her former courage had turned into insignificance. The teacher confirmed that this was indeed the case. Ordinary children break down without any unnecessary hesitation. The principal said he was worried about her being the daughter of a demon, but the teacher added that she was just an ordinary child. At that moment, he noticed the image in the crystal and turned pale with fear. The director saw his face and turned to see what was going on. The girl raised her head again and tears streamed down her cheeks. The voice from the necklace reminded Sienna that she shouldn't get distracted. Thanks to this voice, she woke up from the illusion. When she took the necklace in her hands, she immediately felt warmth, and a feeling spread through her body that everything would be fine. However, now was not the time to relax, and the little girl understood this. She pulled herself together. These people were no longer her family, so they couldn't hurt her. Now she has a precious father who loves and cares for her. He himself sewed her a handbag in the shape of a rabbit, similar to his daughter. Seeing this, the little girl clarified that she was not a rabbit, but her father continued to smile. He then said that his Sienna was the smallest and cutest bunny. The girl realized that she was reborn with the only thought of creating a happy family. Her father took great care of her and did everything to ensure that she did not need anything. His warm and gentle voice enveloped her in comfort and made her feel needed. This unconditional love was something the little girl had not experienced in her past life when her parents abandoned her. At that moment, Sienna started running and screaming that she would protect her father and survive at any cost in order to live happily. The teacher and the principal were in shock. The little girl would soon emerge from the ghostly labyrinth. The men couldn't figure out what to do, because if this continued, the illusion spell would end. At that moment, they simultaneously looked at the girl standing next to them, lost in her memories. The director realized that he couldn't let this girl ruin his life. After that, he immediately reached out his hands to Sienna, threatening to make her fall asleep forever. In her memories, the girl thought about protecting her father and ran further and further. She remembered her father's tender words about his love, and this gave her the strength to move forward. The man kept saying that he would take care of everything and that the girl just needed to be happy. Sienna understood that she dreamed of a happy life with her father and could not die here. At that moment, she woke up, and the director looked at her in bewilderment. The little girl handed the crystal to the principal, saying that it was his turn now. Sienna remembered that the illusion spell had a critical limit. When the illusion is destroyed, the illusionist receives a strong blow. At that moment, the director collapsed to the floor and could not get up. The girl said with a smile that a strong person could get out of this horror. The weak one will be destroyed in the same second. The teacher watched what was happening in shock, not knowing what to do. He began to threaten the girl, to which the little girl asked what she had done wrong. The teacher shouted that she had threatened the principal and failed the test. Then Sienna wondered if the director understood what was happening. With a sad sigh, she asked if the man was a fool. Then she invited the teacher to join the principal and reached into her purse. Taking out a mirror, she asked if the teacher knew what this thing was. The man anxiously replied that it was a low-level artifact, and the girl looked at him strangely. Sienna explained that it was a disposable item that could easily be purchased. But in this situation, he would be especially useful, which shocked the teacher. He fell to his knees, screaming that he was sorry and that he was just following orders. The girl asked if he could have changed anything and added with a smile that it was sad. The teacher continued to beg for mercy, repeating that he was very sorry. The girl used the mirror with a smile, saying that there would be no mercy. The men lay unconscious, and the girl walked away, calling them fools. For some time they were unable to get out, and the baby was safe. The girl understood that the nightmares of evil people are always especially terrible. She wanted them to stay in these nightmares forever, but it was impossible. Suddenly, the girl saw the light of the necklace and realized that the fairy had appeared in the labyrinth of illusions. She thanked the fairy for protecting her in her most difficult moment. At that moment, the baby's father burst into the room, and the girl looked at him in amazement. She didn't understand how Dad got there and what was happening. The father turned to his daughter with tears in his eyes, and it was clear from his face how worried he was. Sienna stood motionless, not understanding how her father had ended up here. Then she threw herself into his arms, finally showing how scared she was. The father, with a serious look, suggested that the girl return to the estate. He promised to make sure those two never showed up again. In the family estate, the world was quiet, and the stars dotted the entire night sky, illuminating the people with their beauty. Matthias scolded his daughter as he asked and warned her not to do anything dangerous. Even though it was a test, he asked her not to follow dangerous people because he was worried about what he would do if something happened to her. Looking at his daughter, he asked what happened there, Sien. Looking away, tried to hide her emotions. Having activated the cute flower mode, she smoothly moved away from the topic, saying that she was only thinking about Daddy, and the illusion was destroyed. Matthias was touched by the fact that his daughter, even in the most difficult moment, did not forget about his support and love. Forgetting his worries, he asked her to be more careful next time. Hugging Sien, Matthias assumed that his daughter was very scared, so he offered her some sweet cake to eat. The incredibly beautiful-looking cake with strawberries and marshmallows inside attracted the girl's attention. He asked Sienna's father if she liked the cake, to which the girl answered positively and suggested that her father try it too. But suddenly, bad memories of a past life where her father yelled and insulted her appeared in her head. Sien immediately turned pale and felt sick. The girl began to tremble from bad memories. So she turned to her father, who had previously said that it was okay even if Sien was useless. Even if she is not good, even if she breaks all the most expensive mugs, she wanted to hear an answer from her father. I timidly lowered my head and looking at the cake. It was clear how the girl was worried about the answer of her loved one. Matthias smiled sweetly, saying with his smile that he would accept his daughter no matter what. And after that, looking at this softly, he replied that all this is not important, because she is his daughter. If she breaks 100 cups, he will buy her 1,000. The little girl was very surprised with tears in her eyes. She did not believe that her own father could answer her like that. She was certainly lucky in this life. Matthias understood that the girls could feel very heavy at heart after the illusion test, because it shows all the worst fears of people. Clenching her hands into fists, she didn't know what to do because she would start crying now, and her dad would worry again because of her tears. Sien didn't understand when calling someone dad made her feel so emotional. Unable to contain her feelings and emotions, she burst into tears, and Matthias began to worry that he had suddenly said something wrong. Wiping the tears from Sien's face, he asked for forgiveness. It's just that he's never been a father before, so it's not going well. Sien denied that Daddy was bad because he did a lot for her. In her eyes, Matthias was such a pure person that she did not believe that he could survive in such a world. She was so sorry Sien couldn't say anything, but she loved her dad more than anyone in the world because he was the best dad in the world. So being together at that moment, they were the happiest people. The night continued and there was deep silence in the castle of Mirmod. After such a hard evening they went to bed. Sien kept thinking that she couldn't cry all the time. She needed to become stronger. You feel happy she should survive, and since the director has sorted it out, she has time to prepare. The external enemy, the director, always used the same technique, so she dealt with him quite easily. The next opponent from the Mirmod family would not be as easy, so she needed to focus and come up with a plan. But if gradually, step by step, she expands her influence even in a terrible family, the Cyanite can survive if Dad is around. Therefore, Sien must stay away from strangers until she becomes stronger. Lying on the waterbed, Matthias noticed that his daughter was constantly tossing and turning, so he turned to her. Looking at his daughter with a smile on his face, the father said that he was recognized as the heir. Now he is the Viscount of the Roserne territory and the next head of the family, something the little girl clearly didn't expect to hear. This was too much of a surprise for Sien, as her plan to gradually increase her strength collapsed. She didn't understand why Dad was made the heir to the family. Did he really have some kind of hidden power? And when Sien heard that her father had been accepted by the Senate because he had a kind and noble heart, she realized that they wanted to kill him. She knew the Senate was targeting her good-natured daddy, and now Sien didn't know what to do. So it was difficult to build up strength, and now she found out that Matthias had taken on the role of heir. As soon as Axel found out about this, he would definitely come for them. So sitting on the bed sadly, she did not understand what future awaited them. The father wanted to know what was going on, why the little girl was so sad, so he asked questions. Now Cian clearly understood that the Senate chairman had manipulated her father, and then Axel found out about it and killed Matthias. Since he was chosen as the heir, even if he surrendered or tried to escape, every ambitious man in Mirmod would come to kill Matthias. Clenching her fist, she knew that the only way to survive was to make her father a worthy duke. Inspired by this thought, Cian exclaimed that her father would become a wonderful duke, and she would help him in everything. Matthias laughed at this. It was so cute in his eyes that he couldn't help but smile. Kissing his baby, he spoke of how much strength his words gave him. Cian accepted all the affection and care of her father because she understood that they might not have another moment. But after a while she pushed her father away, saying that now was not the time to relax. The girl reminded her father to stand straight and keep his head held high. She also imagined how she should stamp her foot, setting an example for her father. But now she asked to listen to her father carefully, because she was giving the most important punishment to listen and repeat after her. The little girl taught her father how to communicate with unwanted people. Matthias did not expect to hear such curses from his daughter. With tears in his eyes, Matthias asked how his daughter Cian knew such terrible words. Matthias began to ask his daughter who taught her such expressions. The girl realized that it was too much for her father. So the morning came. The North Spire looked beautiful under the rays of the hot sun. After that night incident, father scolded Sienna for another hour. She was genuinely upset about it because you were just worried about father. The overgrown maids noticed the mistress's behavior, and since it was strange, they began to whisper. These maids had only one problem with snacking. I guess the young lady had the same problem. They advised her something between strawberry and chocolate cake. Cian twirled her hair and knew that these maids were just interfering with her thinking, but she couldn't make the right decision, so she hesitated. Time flies at an incredible speed, and we don't notice how the next day is already approaching. Due to the sudden and mysterious death of the Academy's director and teacher, classes are currently cancelled, which Cian found strange since they were wandering around the ghostly labyrinth and not dying so quickly. So she started to wonder if there was some problem with the illusion spell, but after a while, Cian decided that there was no need to think about the death of minor villains. She didn't have time for that. Cian's special maids approached her and congratulated her on the fact that her father had become the heir, and the Duchess was planning to give her a new estate. All this did not concern Cian as much as the problem she would have to face in the near future. And also Sienna. It seemed like these maids wanted to stay with her forever, so she made them a promise that when she grew up she would build a gym in the manor. The maids were incredibly happy. They expressed their gratitude to the lady, which made the girl smile sincerely. But the sudden thought that in the end they were now only closer to death quickly destroyed the pink castles of Sienna. In the original novel, the main villain was Axel. News of her father becoming the heir spread quickly, causing the man to appear at any moment. This man is consumed by the lust for power and has a terrible thirst for blood. In fact, Axel killed all the family members who stood against him during the rebellion. And since Matthias became the heir, there is no doubt that his name took the honorable first place on the list of Axel's victims. Cian was sure that a fight with Axel was inevitable, but she didn't think it would happen so quickly. But fortunately, the adventure with the director was crowned with success, in which case Cian decided to double the stakes. Jumping from her chair, Sienna turned to her special maids, wanting to give them instructions. Cian wanted them to deliver a message to her grandmother saying that she wanted to see her. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rukella was having tea in the garden with her close friends. Enjoying a cup of tea in good company, she didn't care about anything. These ladies discussed Axel, who sent doves from the battlefield, most of them describing his exploits and victories over enemies. It was obvious to them that it was for Togo to show off his skills. They didn't like such an arrogant and impudent boy. But this was not the only topic of discussion, because the director of the academy had recently died, but for Roos this was not a problem, since they would simply appoint someone else in his place. Having said this, she continued to sip her tea. The ladies found the Duchess's reaction too indifferent. They also talked about Lord Matthias, who had recently officially become the family's heir. The ladies began to exchange glances, but Mrs. Rukella did not even react to the news that her son had become the heir. Apparently, the Duchess's friends were not talking about what interested her. Trying to interest the lady, they changed the topic of conversation every now and then. Suddenly, the conversation turned to Cian. Rumors were circulating that she was incredibly smart. When she heard this, she didn't know how to react to such statements towards Sienna. Apparently, one of the friends did not know that she could not talk about that woman's child because it could seriously damage the relationship between the Grand Duchess and Matthias. Sian's mother was the very woman, the very reason why Matthias left the family. She was also the one behind the infamous event for the devil from the old capital. The events of the devil and the old capital, the beloved Yuella, mother of Sienna, tried to summon the demon but failed. She was unable to complete the call, but informers learned of her actions and dragged her into the temple, where a tragic death awaited her. There she was recognized as a witch, and therefore burned at the stake. And Matthias, upset by this action, could not contain his feelings and emotions. He had only one thing left: revenge. He killed everyone who reported his woman, punishing and avenging her. His methods were so terrible that it was called the Bloody Purge. The Duchess could not possibly like such a topic. But suddenly, the Duchess began to ask if her friends had seen this honey jar. The ladies realized that the young lady had been given a unique nickname by the Duchess. Mrs. Rukella was a little irritated by the women's repeated questions, but she remembered how the little girl called her grandma and extended her hand to her. Rukella noted how smart this girl was. Such statements were surprising to the ladies, so they were in shock. Starting to think about how the lady treats her granddaughter, they did not understand what happened between them. Noticing how the ladies were whispering, Rukella asked why they were so surprised. Women were afraid to express their opinions because they did not want to incur the mistress's wrath. So they just started nodding along, saying that Lady Sian was really wonderful and very impressive. Such praise from his friends made Rukella feel embarrassed. It seemed they had found the Duchess's weak spot. Realizing that this topic was relevant to the lady, they began to praise the young lady. Holding a beautiful cup of tea in her hands, Rukella could not refuse their words. After all, most children her age still run around with runny noses. But the lady understood that she did not want to bring trouble upon the little girl, so she said that she did not recognize her so much. The friends were confused. They didn't understand whether she liked her granddaughter or not. After some time, the entrance to the greenhouse opened. The maid came closer to the lady, addressing her, but Rukella immediately noticed. The lady did not like the maid's behavior because she asked not to disturb her at this time. But the maid still dared to report that Lady Sian had requested a personal audience. After some time, the little foot entered the Duchess's vast domain. After telling her grandmother that Sian missed her, she immediately headed towards her. The smile never left her face. She was glad to see her granny, whom she rarely had the chance to meet. Seeing such a cute little girl, women couldn't take their eyes off her. And the Duchess, smiling slightly, decided to finish their tea party for today. So after some time, the Duchess and the young lady found themselves in Ruckel's office, sitting opposite each other. Sian hasn't been able to meet with the Information Guild yet, so getting information from the Duchess is the best option now. Duchess Rukella is the best information provider that Sian knows, so she needs to find out everything about Axel and the current situation. Suddenly, the Duchess began to speak, which attracted the attention of the young lady. The woman immediately demanded that the honey bun sit on her lap right now. Sian was stunned by this turn of events. She did not understand what was happening to the Duchess. Rukella didn't want to repeat herself several times, so her gaze became stern when I didn't hear it the first time. The little girl understood that it was better not to anger her grandmother and to do as she wished. After a while, Sian obeyed and was already sitting on her grandmother's lap. The girl quickly did what Rukella said, but why did the Duchess want Sian to sit on her lap? The little girl did not see the Duchess's face because she was sitting with her back to her, which made her even more scared. But Rukella decided to start the dialogue herself, saying that a big event would soon happen in the family in about 3 months. Sian decided she needed to find out more, so she started telling him how the maids said the scary guy would be there too. Anyone can become the heir of the family, no matter whether it is a direct descendant or from a collateral family, so everyone who wants to fight for the place of the heir will gather. Suddenly, Sian heard what she wanted, because her grandmother had said there were 3 candidates for the place of heir. The little girl wanted to know the names of these 3 scary people, so she asked her grandmother and found out that they were Axel, Delphia, and one more person. But the most annoying among them is Axel. He said that he will finish enslaving the monster, which usually takes a year, in a month, and will return. An annoying and arrogant guy. Hearing this, the little girl began to sweat, as she understood that her most terrible enemy would return in a month. Sitting on her grandmother's lap, she was upset because she didn't think she would be able to win over this family in a month. Turning her head from side to side, she tried to bring herself to her senses, because she still had time. Seeing how worried the girl was, the Duchess put her hand on her head and began to stroke it, asking her not to worry about anything, because Matthias would take care of everything. But Cian didn't think so, because her good-natured father wouldn't be able to win the place of heir, and everything would end in a massacre. Her soft and naive dad can't be trusted. Cian has to figure this out on her own because Axel uses dark magic. This is why learning white magic or divine power can help her deal with this villain. So she hoped that she would be able to defeat the strongest contender for the role of heir to the family. Suddenly, the grandmother changed the subject, saying that it might be boring for a while until a new director of the academy was appointed. Zero Sienna was not upset because she could always come to her granny and learn from her. In one fell swoop, the girl was able to solve several problems at once. After all, the Duchess was the best teacher one could find. The Duchess has a huge influence on the family. She is still part of high society, and since she is a powerful magician, someone who can freely use potions and poisons, so perhaps she can tell Cian about white magic. The girl's eyes lit up because she realized that her grandmother must have the strength to restrain Axel. She immediately started using her seduction skills. Cian began to confess her feelings of sympathy to the Duchess. The little girl also talked about how Grandma is the coolest in the world and that she wants to be like Grandma. The Duchess froze without saying a word. It seemed she had not expected to hear such statements. And it seemed that the word cool made her furious. Perhaps she did not regard this word as praise. Seeing Rukella's reaction, Cian decided not to give up and continued asking questions on how she could become as cool as her grandma. The girl continued to act out, screaming throughout the room that she wanted to learn the same powerful spell to deal with dark spells. The atmosphere around the Duchess darkened, and she seemed less than delighted with her granddaughter's remarks. Feeling this heavy atmosphere, Cian knew she had screwed up. But after a while, the Duchess exhaled heavily and said that she had no choice. With a smile on her face, she announced that she had decided to teach Cian personally, as she wanted to learn the most powerful and dangerous spells. Once upon a time, Rukella was the same, so Cian reminded her of those times. Besides, the director of the academy did not have a successor, and all the teachers were confused. It would be better for the Duchess to teach her granddaughter herself. "I want the Duchess," and there was a frightening expression on her face. Everything turned out well. Thanking Grandma, Cian decided to find out when they would start training. It seems that Grandma was fired up by this idea and decided that they would start training tomorrow. Cian was stunned and scared as she didn't expect the training to start so soon. I had a lot to prepare, so she decided to send the message in the morning. The next morning, Leonardo was walking through the mansion's garden as usual. Cian approached him and asked him to study with her. Grandma looked at this with skepticism since only Cian agreed to teach, but the girl introduced Leonardo as her friend and asked to teach him too. That day, she immediately came back and asked Leon to join the training. After all, Leon is not training now, and in the future, he will become her strong employee. It will be great if they become stronger together. Cian didn't want to admit that she had called Leonardo out of fear of the Duchess's burning determination. After some time, the Duchess replied that it did not matter. She had come to terms with her granddaughter's decision. But she still didn't want to teach children who didn't fit her standards. This woman was incredibly cunning and smart, so she prepared something for the children. Leonardo and Cian prepared themselves to hear what they would have to face in order to study with the Duchess. "We collect a magical fireball in our hand." The Duchess announced that she would conduct a test. Cian was scared. She didn't understand what could await her. Maybe she wouldn't be able to pass this test at all. So, pressing her fist to her chest, she knew she would have to try. For her, the one who was reborn, the test for her grandmother was surprisingly easy. So Cian got the highest score on the general knowledge test. There was also a logic test where Cian also excelled. Naturally, Leo also had the highest score. Now Cian was not afraid of her grandmother's tests. She knew that she would cope with them without any problems. And Grandma announced that it was time to stop playing stupid games, because in essence, they were just the basics. After some time, she announces that it is time to move on to testing the magical power. Cian immediately tensed up because she didn't know how these tests were conducted in this world and whether she would be able to handle them at all. Magic power is used for all types of magic, so physical ability is also important. Abilities vary greatly depending on the amount of magic power. And I understood that in fact this test was the most important event today. The Duchess asked them to close their eyes and feel the mana in their bodies. Then she would check the amount of mana in their bodies. Leonardo and Cian closed their eyes and waited for the Duchess to determine their mana levels. At first, she decided to determine Leonardo's level, so she extended her palm to his forehead. Cian remembered what she had read earlier in the novel, how Leonardo would later be spoken of as the man who stood shoulder to shoulder with Axel. So she was very curious about how much mana he had. Checking Leonardo, Rukella was incredibly happy. The grin on her face did not disappear. She noted that Leonardo was different from his parents. His potential was on a different level. Now she could say with confidence that this boy had an incredibly bright future. She couldn't even determine exactly how much mana he had, but the boy didn't react to it in any way. Hearing this, Cian asked herself many questions, because this was not mentioned in the novel. Hearing the Duchess praise the boy, Cian was incredibly happy that he was on her side. However, the Duchess recalled that Leonardo was now living in Axel's annex. Cian didn't know about this at all. Now she realized that she was hanging out with her enemy's student. He didn't react to this emotionally in any way. Once again, he ignored the Duchess's words and remained silent. The woman did not understand why Leonardo became close to Sienna if that guy could teach him. The boy took a deep breath, preparing to answer. He said that he was not interested in some Axel or anyone else. All he wanted was to just be with the chestnut, as he called Cian. Looking at the baby, he smiled softly, thereby showing interest in her. Cian was a little annoyed by this, as she felt that it was not right to talk to the Duchess like that. Leonardo didn't need to be so proud when he responded so disrespectfully. But the Duchess, on the contrary, replied that this was a perfectly satisfactory answer. The little girl didn't expect such an answer from her grandmother. She didn't understand what exactly she liked about him. The Duchess reached out to the mask and wanted to take it off because it was unnecessary, but Leonardo immediately became frightened. For the first time in a long time, the boy lost his temper, went crazy, and asked not to touch this mask. Everyone was amazed by the boy's behavior. They didn't think that he was so attached to her. Leonardo was shaking. He was covered in sweat. It was obvious how bad he felt. Noticing this, Cian immediately began to wonder why the boy was shaking, what was wrong with him, why he valued this mask so much. But she understood that Leonardo was behaving clearly rudely. He looked like a hissing, frightened kitten. This was literally how Cian imagined Leonardo in her head, shaking every now and then. But she felt sorry for him because he looked so scared and lonely, and she wanted to support him. So, to calm Leonardo down, she grabbed his sleeve, thus showing her concern. Silently, with her eyes wide open, she looked at him intently without looking away. Noticing the way Cian was looking at him, Leonardo calmed down and smiled back at her. And the Duchess said that he had had enough. It was time to test Cian. Approaching the baby, she prepared to measure her mana and determine how strong her granddaughter was. The little girl closed her eyes and told her grandmother that she was ready for the test. The Duchess was already anticipating how much mana her granddaughter would have, and she expected no less than Leonardo's. The light coming from Sienna was incredibly bright. It seems like she really has a huge amount of mana. A slight breeze blew, the leaves fell from the trees, and deathly silence fell. The Duchess was shocked. She was speechless. She did not understand how something like this could happen. They carefully checked the baby's body. She tried to find at least a small amount of mana, but she did not succeed. And when Cian heard this, she was stunned, as she did not expect that this could happen to her. Hearing this, Leonardo also could not believe the Duchess's words. But Cian couldn't say anything in her defense. She, like the others, couldn't utter a word. The castle will remember this summer day for a long time, because Cian screamed throughout the entire area. It's not even weakness, there's nothing at all. The baby was amazed at how weak her body was. She didn't understand how this was possible because she felt something moving in her body. Grandma couldn't answer Cian because it was very strange that she didn't feel anything. She had never experienced anything like this before. Is this really a punishment for reincarnation? It turns out that Sienna has no chance of survival. The grandmother tried to calm her granddaughter down because there was no reason to be upset, because she was once the same. All that was left for Cian was to continue her studies, but in a different way she has a sharp mind, so she will become a good administrator. But suddenly it dawned on Cian that she understood why her grandmother couldn't sense her mana, so I asked permission to go somewhere to test my theory. The Duchess could not allow her granddaughter to just walk around the palace, so she asked where she wanted to go. In this world, magic is not something special, and since she was reborn, she clearly knows who is the strongest in this world. Her plan changed. If Cian couldn't become strong, she would just surround herself with strong people. This was her new plan, so she asked her grandmother for permission to go to the Sanoa church. In the novel, The Life of Melody, the main character, Saint Melody, gave love even to those who did not believe in gods. She was so kind that she even consoled those who committed evil deeds. Melody's holy power was extraordinary, but its source was the holy relics bestowed by the gods and her powerful holy knights. She fought against villains, including the Mirmod family. The first place where she became known as a saint was the Church of Sanoa. In the Sanoa temple, there were many holy relics and knights that surrounded Melody, although it is very difficult to lure a knight to your side, but the strongest holy knight protected Melody, Knight Ted. He was supposed to be Cian, which is why she was so eager to get to the Church of Sanoa to pray to the gods. Perhaps the gods would grant her holy power. Under this pretext, she asked her grandmother for permission. But Rukella didn't really like this idea, even though the Church of Sanoa was located in the village, which made it less noticeable, but still, a church is a church. They will inevitably be hostile to the Dark Mirmod family. And Rukella couldn't go with the baby, because she understood that the church could regard it as an attack. So she began to think that she should refuse, but when Rukella noticed the expression on the little girl's face, Grandma couldn't say no to her honeypot, so she asked Cian to take something with her. This made the children interested as they wanted to know what kind of gift Grandma had prepared for Cian. The Duchess immediately said that there was nothing special about it, but it was something that could be useful to the baby. Church of Sanoa, thanks to Duchess Rukella, Cian easily reached the right place. Leonardo also showed concern and support for the baby, blessing her on her journey. Cian was a thoughtful little girl, so for her own safety, she took in the maid sisters. And now, following the plot of the novel, she just needed to recruit her brother knight correctly. The power of a holy knight and black magic are opposites, so it should be of great help in confronting Axel. Inspired and motivated by her thoughts about the plan, Cian walked her path faithfully. The stairs were so long that the girl got tired of climbing them. One of the maid sisters called out to Sienna, getting her attention. They offered to carry the lady on their backs so that Cian could get to the right place comfortably. So Cian decided to immediately take advantage of the maid's offer, happily jumping on their shoulders. It would have taken her a long time to climb up alone, but thanks to the maid sisters, they reached the center of the church in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, the maids turned to Cian, telling her that they needed to leave her. The little girl was scared. She didn't understand why they were leaving her. But the Holy Church was the opposite of the Mirmod family, so the maids could not stay in this place for long. Scratching her head, Stan knew that it made perfect sense, since she was from a villainous family. So Cian decided that she would convince the maids that she could handle it on her own. When saying goodbye to the sisters, the maids asked Cian to be more careful, and they also promised that they would join her soon. Cian walked into the church mindlessly, not even thinking about where she could find the Holy Knight. She couldn't search every corner, but suddenly she noticed something in the distance. There were children walking in front. They were young priests. They were the ones who could help Cian. Running towards them with a smile on her face, Cian immediately greeted them, showing her friendliness. One of the young priests responded, and it sounded quite negative, as if he was driving her away with his tone. The young priestesses immediately began to demand money. Apparently they loved donations more than their faith. The boys began to wonder if the woman in front of them was an aristocrat, but they did not see a single maid. So, deciding that she was a beggar, they began to mock her. The words of the young priests irritated Cian, because no one had abandoned her and she was not a beggar. Clenching her fist, she thought of her father's words, which always reminded her that Cian was his treasure. The little girl knew she had to say something in her defense, but she couldn't say anything. Her body was dumbfounded. Could it be because of the psychological trauma of her past life? And the young priests began to mock her, thinking that before them was a retarded girl who heard everything but said nothing. They began to look at her, paying attention to her plump cheeks. The children cruelly called her a pig. Clenching her fist, Cian wanted to answer for all the words that were spoken to her here, but she couldn't. After a while, having collected her thoughts, Cian decided that she could no longer remain silent. She decided to respond to rudeness with rudeness, so the girl spat on the floor and said that she was looking for someone. And, having lost her temper, she yelled at the rude young priests, asking them to get out of her way. The young priests did not understand what was happening, why some little girl was yelling at them. So they decided to respond even more harshly, and hitting the little girl on the head, they chased her out of their church. Sian was in so much pain when her hair was grabbed that she started threatening the mean boys. Her head was spinning and tears were already welling up, as it was impossible to bear. And the little girl wasn't joking about grabbing the priest by the hair, so they both stood there holding onto each other's hair. Suddenly a voice was heard. Sian and the priest noticed an adult male voice. But the man, standing in front of the children, taught the young priests not to offend their friends. Wiping the tears from her face, Sian turned her attention to who was standing in front of them. With blonde hair and blue eyes, it seemed like he was the man Sian was looking for. Tall and dressed in white, with a sword at his white side, this man was an example for many saints. A perfectionist who makes sure his clothes are white every day, with a barely noticeable scar on his left cheek. Her eyes immediately lit up. She realized that in front of her was exactly the person she was looking for. The holy knight she wanted to make hers, Ted, appeared before Sian. Standing in the spacious hallway of the temple, the holy knight Ted scolded the young priests for their ignorant treatment of the parishioners. With a grin on their faces, the boys began to justify themselves, saying that they hadn't even touched the girl with a finger. They simply brazenly began to blame the girl, who was half their size and younger. Ted asked them not to lie, reminding the young men about the last incident with the maids. But the most talkative of them continued to argue, asking for evidence that Ted did not have. Sian tried to listen carefully to their dialogue, remembering the names that were familiar to her from the novel. The young priest cleared himself of all charges, asking Ted to simply throw out the little brat he had pointed his finger at. Sian immediately noticed that even though this guy was young, he knew that holy knights were higher in rank than holy knights. And the little girl couldn't stand such treatment, so she also entered into a verbal altercation. But the young priests did not want to give up their positions. They continued to insist that they were right. Unexpectedly, Sian rolled up her sleeves and showed the boy her bracelet, asking if they knew what it was. One of them assumed it was just a cheap bracelet, but the other knew what it could be but couldn't believe it. A bracelet, a law recording device, which showed how the boys began to pester Sian. Now Sian had not just words but solid evidence with which she could prove her case. This protective artifact for children that Grandma Sian gave her just helped her. Now, after the video broadcast, the young priest no longer felt so confident. But even with such compelling evidence, they behaved so shamelessly. Sian didn't want to go that far, but these kids just didn't leave her with a choice, so she decided that if things continued like this, she would call her grandmother. The young priests were confident boys. Their status did not make them better, so they were not afraid of anything. At this point, Sian couldn't stand it any longer and decided to say that her grandmother was Duchess Rukella Mirmod. The young priest did not expect this at all, but in this world, the Mirmod clan was even more terrible than the boogeyman. Holy Knight Ted also froze after these words. Was he really afraid of Grandma Sian? After some time, there was already a cup of good tea on the table. And Sian sat at the same table with the Holy Knight Ted, who offered his sincere apologies for what happened. The little girl happily swung her legs, as the young priests had given in, even though she hadn't even called her grandmother yet. Sian wanted to win over Knight Ted, so she played the saint and forgave those boys. Ted was grateful for the generous forgiveness, but he also wondered what had brought a man from the Mirmod family to such a place. The girl immediately realized that it was time to use the knowledge from the original plot. Melody used the same method to win Ted over, so Sian thought she could do it. The little girl took out a newspaper, which contained an advertisement that a certain Ted was looking for his family. So Sian decided to tell the Holy Knight that she had seen a child similar to the one in the advertisement. She also reported that she was on Pelrod Street at the time. Rising abruptly from the table, Ted decided that if the girl's words were true, he would definitely pay her back. It was clear that the man's words were sincere and pure. He was truly ready to fulfill any wish. Sian, although she knew the plot, was surprised to see Ted's sincere feelings and emotions. So, after some time, she decided to tell her story about how scared she was at the Mirmod estate and that she didn't know what to do in such a situation, how to protect her father. Standing before Ted, she naturally spoke vividly about her stay at the estate. And that's why she wanted Ted to become a Knight of Siena. Ted was amazed. He had never imagined that a child would ever ask him for such a thing. Ted looked down, not knowing what to answer, as he didn't want to disappoint the child who was full of hope. But after some time, he admitted that this was impossible since he already had someone to protect. This was very strange for Sian, as she knew that there was no one with Tel at this time. Ted, meanwhile, with his head down, continued to ask for forgiveness. And Sienna continued to think about why Ted refused her. Was it really something personal? The girl thought. Frowning, she still couldn't hide her expression, and she still suggested that Ted find his relatives. Lord Holy Knight was very surprised because the little girl should not have done this, because Ted could not help her now and in the future. But the little girl realized that she did not need to be protected because she understood that it was all about faith. After these words, the man lowered his gaze and began to think whether it was really a matter of faith. Ted dropped to one knee and addressed the young lady Mirmod. Kneeling down, he spoke of how grateful he was to Sien and how he would never forget her kindness. In a folded handkerchief, the man handed the little girl a completely worthless relic. But when Sien looked at Ted's gift more closely, she realized that he had given her Melody's hairpin from the novel. Apparently, he gave it to her when their friendship became stronger. Maybe Sien is going down the same path. It was unknown whether Ted would become Sien's, but it was too early to judge, and she also knew very well about the man's desire to protect his family. Suddenly, the girl started talking. She asked to meet her in 3 Nights on Pelrod Street. The man, with a barely noticeable scar on his face and a smile, agreed without thinking twice. The day of Matthias's ascension to the throne was finally approaching, and Sien was ready for it. She was incredibly happy about this because everyone would see the magnificence of her father. By the power vested in me, I appoint Matthias Mirmod as count. Sien didn't understand why the ceremony was so simple. Were they doing it without enthusiasm because Matthias was the one who would need to be replaced? Many were already whispering behind Sien's back, saying that her father would soon be thrown out of Mirmod Castle as soon as Axel and Delphia returned. Moving away from the little girl, they continued their discussion, which Sien didn't like at all, because in her eyes there was no one better than her dad. The whispers of these guys were so loud that Sien could hear everything. How dare they treat her and her father like they were nothing? But suddenly they froze, stood dumbfounded, and sweat poured down their faces. Sien noticed their strange behavior, but she didn't understand why they were avoiding her gaze. The little girl had completely forgotten about her sisters, who looked very frightening, and when the maid suggested dealing with these men, Sien loudly objected. After all, such cruel behavior towards others can break Daddy's heart. Sien never understood why her sisters had that look on their faces when she started talking about their father. Starting to sweat and worry, the women decided to tell the young lady that Lord Matthias most likely would not cry. Sien didn't understand anything, but apparently these sisters still believe in the Lord's potential. After some time, when the ceremony was over, Sienna saw her father and extended her hands to him. Matthias was also incredibly happy to see his daughter, so he happily ran to meet her. Having lifted her up on his arm, the man heard sincere words of congratulations, for which he was grateful. Looking at his daughter with a warm and soft gaze, Matthias said that now he too had something to congratulate Sien on. Since Sien became the daughter of the officially adopted heir of the family, she will no longer live in the Northern Calm. Her personal palace would be decorated with fountains and rose gardens, which the girl was endlessly happy about. From this very moment, Sien and her sisters will live in this most beautiful princess castle. The vein in Matthias's hand appeared, and he turned to his daughter, asking and wishing that they live happily in this very place. Looking at her father, the little girl noticed how her dad smiled sincerely and warmly. She wanted to live with her dad for a very, very long time. She wanted to see such a warm daddy smile every day. So Sien decided that in this beautiful but dangerous castle, she would definitely protect her dad. At night, in the outbuilding near the house, something strange happened. The servants bowed to Lord Matthias and also informed him that he had a visitor. However, the man was interested in something completely different what had happened to the Delphian spy. One of the servants reported that they knocked him out and put him in prison, and he also reported that, apparently, Delphia would be here soon. Matthias was surprised. Since Delphia would arrive earlier than he expected, spies were not needed, so he allowed the servants to do with them whatever they wanted. But he ordered only one thing: to behave decently in front of Sien, so that she would not suspect anything. The servants became tense, as they did not understand what this meant and why they should pretend. Matthias decided to explain what this expression of his meant. It means to behave like obedient dogs. After all, his daughter will be taking part in tomorrow's hunting competition. Therefore, it was necessary to behave well, since bad behavior would have a negative impact on the child's upbringing. Matthias didn't just talk. He threatened that if anyone showed an evil face in front of the child, everyone would be executed. The guards had nothing to say. Now they realized that they would have to pretend to be good uncles. So the night ended. The long-awaited morning and the day of hunting games arrived. The maid sisters had been praising the little girl since early morning, saying how wonderful she looked. This dark dress really suited the young lady, but she was so excited. It seems like it's all because Sian is waiting for the hunting competition to start. But in fact, the little girl was excited for another reason. And of course, the maid Sian did not tell her sisters about this. Just yesterday, she was determined that she had no magical power, and today, Grandma gave Sian so many attacking artifacts. And she taught them how to use them, so she couldn't wait to try them out. The little girl was equipped from head to toe. The maids reported that on the way to the competition, Lord Matthias's subordinates, that is, his friends, would come to meet them. Sian knew that these were subordinates from the villain family and hoped that they weren't using Dad. It can't be that in Mirmod there are people as kind and sympathetic as Father Sian. It was simply impossible for such people to exist in this place. But if they did, it would be much more difficult to protect Dad and his friends. But since they were Daddy's assistants, Sian decided that she had to protect them too, since the head of the family had so much to do. The sisters opened the castle doors for Sian, for which the little girl thanked them. She was excited because she expected to meet her dad's friends. But when she opened the door and looked at them, she couldn't contain her emotions. The men, in clean shoes, came to see the young lady off to the hunting competition. I present to you Matthias's subordinates, Millie Omont, a real cutie. They, with bows, asked to take good care of them. This is how men behaved to please the child. But for Sian, it looked so terrible that the maids immediately began to talk about executing these two. Suddenly, Matthias came up from behind, asking for forgiveness for being late. He was shocked when he saw how the men chose to appear before his daughter. Thus, dumbfounded by what they saw, the father and Sian could not move for some time. And Sian wondered if these were really Dad's friends, to which Matthias responded positively, saying that they were a little retarded. They were in a hurry because they were late, and because of this they were already getting into the carriage when Lord Matthias was approached by his so-called friends. Closing Sian's eyes, his face was no longer so happy, and with that expression he promised to talk to his friends later. Millie Omont realized that they had made a grave mistake, and it seemed that they would not be able to expect mercy from their master later. So, left behind, they watched as the carriage drove away without them. The woman reasoned, tapping her sharp nails on the table, and there was anger in her words. After all, she learned from her servants that while she was stuck in this backwater, Matthias Mirmod was appointed heir to the family. Delphia Mirmod, Duchess, although she was incredibly beautiful, do not be fooled by her appearance, for it is deceiving. For her, this was funny, since, taking into account Matthias and Axel, it turned out that the struggle for the place of the heir was becoming tripolar. The servants immediately began to take the side of the lady, saying that the appointment of Mr. Matthias was just smoke and mirrors. Delphia didn't want to hear this, so she waved her hand and ordered her servants to remain silent. She needed to come up with a plan. She wanted to find out what Matthias valued most in the world. Shaking her leg from side to side, she finally understood what Matthias could value. She asked the servants whether Matthias had brought his daughter this time, to which she received a positive answer. And I realized that if, in the event of some unfortunate incident, Matthias's daughter were to disappear, he would most likely be very upset. With a sly grin on her face, it sounded incredibly interesting to her, as she wanted to see Matthias suffer. Matthias, along with his daughter, were heading to the hunting grounds to take part in them. Sienna tried to convince herself that her father's friends were not dangerous, that they should not be judged by their appearance. After all, even the maids, who had initially seemed terrible to her, turned out to be very nice and kind. But the most important thing is that those people are on her father's side, so she decided to ask if those men can really be trusted. By answering positively, Matthias did not want his daughter to doubt his choice. He also understood that those men really did look scary to his daughter. That was a problem. Seeing how Daddy's face darkened, Sienna immediately decided to cheer him up by saying that his friends weren't that scary. Clenching her fists in front of her chest, she said that she was not afraid of them at all, and thought to herself that if anything happened, she could solve the problem with the help of her combat kit. Smiling, Matthias convinced his daughter that those men were not bad, and he also promised to talk to them. But Cian knew her father's problem. He thought all people were nice, so he couldn't be listened to. Cian wasn't that naive. She was constantly thinking about her safety and her father's safety. Therefore, it was necessary to find out as much as possible about today's hunt. Sienna could not go there without information. As the men took off their bows, they sighed deeply, knowing that punishment was already awaiting them. The Miliomants didn't want to be killed. They thought it was because of the ribbon that didn't match their eye color. Perhaps I should have worn that ribbon with the star on it. Lady Cian might have liked it. While driving the carriage, they decided that they would wear such an ornament next time, wanting to please the lady. The place where the hunt takes place is a villa in the Lorca forest, where it takes place every year. The maids were waiting for the gentleman near the carriage, wondering if the young lady was tired from the journey. The father held the child in his arms, insisting that there was still a lot of time before the hunt began, so he suggested that they rest at the villa. The maids asked whether they should prepare a bath for the young mistress, or whether she would like to taste some cake, but Cian refused everything. Even at the villa, she had a lot of things to think about. She couldn't relax in the enemy's lair. For example, how to find out the true identity of Dad's assistants, and also plan a meeting with Sir Ted, which will take place tomorrow. And yet, it is unknown what might happen at hunting competitions today. All in all, there is a lot to do, so Sienna must be fully armed to survive in this terrible world. Standing in the room, Cian decided to go through the artifacts that her grandmother had given her. In one of her pockets, she had an artifact called the Brute Force Pumpkin. On the ears was an artifact called the Earrings of Absolute Protection. And on his neck was an artifact, a necklace of human expansion. So the baby was on her head in all weapons. With these artifacts, Cian felt invincible. And if she catches those people doing something bad, she will be able to deal with them. And she will also have a reason to try out each of her grandmother's gifts on them. Suddenly, a faint sound came from behind the door, but Cian was able to catch it, so she paid attention to it. Turning to the sisters' maids, she asked if they had noticed anything strange. The maids actually noticed something, so they began to listen more carefully in order to protect their mistress. The sound was coming from outside, so Cian headed to the balcony with the maids. There were some suspicious characters standing under her balcony, so the maids became tense. But these were only Dad's friends who wanted to be friends with Cian, and in their hands they held a suspicious flower, similar to lips that could still sing. Cian was shocked when she saw this. She didn't know what to do in such a situation. The maids realized that the father's friends wanted to give this beautiful flower to the mistress, and only Cian did not understand what this pumped-up flower attracted them to. But unexpectedly, the men noticed the girl's reaction, which was not very good. Realizing that they were in trouble, they decided to simply run away for good and for good. Apparently, the boys are more shy than they appear. This is the conclusion reached by one of the maids. And Cian, standing on the balcony, could only watch her father's friends run away and draw conclusions. And all this seemed strange and suspicious to her. She could not remain calm after such a thing. She understood that the strange feeling that Cian had felt not long ago was definitely not caused by these people. Someone's foot stepped forward, as if it was following someone. It looked very suspicious. Then, was it just her imagination that was running wild? Even if that was the case, she had to be careful. Lochern Forest, a place where hunting grounds were set up every year, and a festival was held after it ended. Seeing the fireworks in the sky, Cian realized that the hunting competition had already begun. It was a large-scale event, attended by many noble families. Sitting next to her father, Cian didn't feel any discomfort. On the contrary, she would soon become a villain, so she had to get used to this height. Some aggressive horses were chewing hay just as aggressively. I wonder what they didn't like. The Miliomants were apparently afraid of these horses, as they knew that the master had set them against them. Cian couldn't get used to the appearance of her father's friends. If she met them up close, she might get scared. Cian slapped herself on the cheeks and came to her senses. She had to keep an eye on her father's friends to see if they were up to anything strange. After some time, the father stood up and told Cian that it was time for him to go, to which the girl responded positively. The little girl wondered if her dad would be able to catch at least a hare, but it didn't matter. Cian had to praise him anyway. The heroine noticed how many girls approached her father. They all wanted to give him their scarf. At that moment, Cian realized that she had not prepared Cian for this event at all. At hunting competitions, there is a tradition of tying a scarf around a knight's sword to wish him good luck. Now she was a real duchess, so she couldn't forget about it. She started looking for a handkerchief in her pocket. After some time, she was finally able to find what she was looking for. Her handkerchief looked very cute. It had bunnies on it. But she was very worried that her scarf might look too simple compared to the others. She knew from her seat that this was her father's first hunting competition, so she had to wish him luck. Running up to her father, she wanted to draw his attention to herself in order to give him a gift. Still standing on the ladder, clutching the ceiling with both hands, she handed it to her dad. I hand him such a small and simple handkerchief, she promised that next time she would give him something better. Matthias accepted the handkerchief from his beloved daughter with trepidation. This was quite enough for him. The smile did not leave his face. He promised that he would bring the most beautiful animal to Cyan. The little girl didn't really hope for this, but she still tried to support her father with a smile. So after some time, the father tied Cyan's handkerchief on his sword. With a smile on his face and a calm soul, he went to the competition. And Cyan waved goodbye to her dad. She was glad that her father had no sense of taste. It was time to keep an eye on her subordinates. In Cyan's hands, she held the projector, in the shape of a ball, that her grandmother had given her. The hunt must have already begun, and she saw the men running around some animal. What was it? A rabbit. 3 of them against a small and weak animal. Cyan was very surprised. She didn't expect that her father's friends were so weak. These guys turned out to be very strange and suspicious to her. She also saw how a weak rabbit fought back against her father's subordinates. Seeing this, Cyan was shocked at how weak her father's subordinates were. The girl wondered why her father's subordinates couldn't catch someone so small. They still managed to avoid the peace-loving monster, who was calmly chewing his grass. Could it be that father's subordinates were as weak as Matthias himself? Now Cyan had to protect these guys too. While Cyan was watching her father's subordinates through the orb, some dark aura was approaching her. She had that nagging feeling in her chest again that was bothering her and warning her. She just noticed that her grandmother's artifact reacted, which means she is in danger. Looking into the bushes that were located at a distance from the tent, she tried to find the one who was aiming at her. After some time, Cyan was able to block the magical attack with the earring. She also warned the maids that there were bad people here. Someone would try to use magic. But the maids were already ready, and it was finally time to demonstrate their strength. Cyan believed that even if she, a person without magic, could track down the enemies using the artifact, they were just losers. And the moment they are about to attack again, Cyan plans to attack. But suddenly she realized that the enemies were in the forest and she couldn't reach them. She didn't understand why she became their target. Would they really try to grab her and use her as bait? And if we think about it this way, it turns out that their real target is her dad. She couldn't let that happen, so she had to come up with a plan to stop her opponents. Descending from the sofa, lowering herself onto her feet, she asked the maids to follow her. After all, Cyan was going to secretly sneak into the forest to protect her father. The girl was determined because she could not allow her father to get hurt. Meanwhile, Matthias's subordinates were racking their brains over how to catch the hare alive. They were too fragile, it seemed that if you squeezed them they would break, and so they needed larger game, which came into their hands on its own. Seeing a goblin in the bushes, they decided that it was an ideal target that could be caught alive. In this world, goblins are tasty and nutritious and also hard, making them harder to break. It seemed that the men were obsessed with their goal, which only made the goblin more afraid. Sienna's father's subordinates thought that goblins were very cute, so she should like him too. Covered in sweat, the poor goblin didn't know where to go, but he didn't want to be captured by these men. So the men began to chase after the little goblin, wanting to catch him and show him to Lady Cyan. And the goblin himself did not understand what kind of fools were chasing him, because few people would dare to hunt goblins. One of the robbers reported that it was impossible to kidnap the target. All this was because something was blocking the magic of one of the bandits. One of them suggested that perhaps the exile Matthias had put a barrier around the platform, as was common practice at a gathering of aristocrats. So they decided to try a different tactic, luring the child out of the tent. But while they were still thinking, the little girl had already disappeared from their sight, and now they didn't know where the girl was. Meanwhile, the little girl was already waiting for them, and she decided to attack herself. And when the robbers called her name, she drew attention to herself, asking why they called her by name. Well, they didn't know that their goal could come right into their hands. This shocked the men, because they didn't expect to be exposed. Starting to act like nice guys, the men wondered what the girl was doing there. and when the girl said that she was lost and asked them to walk her home, the men were incredibly happy about this. The bandits decided that the little captain was actually Matthias's abandoned daughter, incredibly stupid. The men relaxed so much that they immediately told him that they had been hired by a very important person and that they were just carrying out their task. Cian started asking about the man, saying that he was incredibly cool, and one of the men said that he was also incredibly handsome. And they also said that it was possible that Cian would meet this person soon. The little girl was very cunning, and at this rate she would find out everything, because the robbers relaxed too much just because she was a child. The men decided to offer the girl a candy, thus trying to lure her, but Cian quickly rejected her, thereby disappointing the men. But the bandits were not going to give up even if Cian did not want to. She had to eat her. Suddenly, the girl started talking about how she could offer the men candy herself, and the men's faces immediately changed. Her eyes lit up, and in her hand was a barrel with which she carried out the attack. It was one of the artifacts that her grandmother gave her for self-defense. The roar resounded throughout the area. In the depths of the forest, one could see something explode. The birds immediately flew away. Their peaceful existence in the forest was disturbed, and the robbers were already tied to a hollow tree. They looked beaten. The cleaning crew, the maid sisters, dealt with these bandits who steal children. Cian stood in front of them with a displeased expression on her face. She had to decide what to do with these bandits. After some time, the little girl decided to just leave them in the forest. In any case, their boss would deal with them for failure. But Cian still couldn't figure out who this handsome man the bandits were talking about was. She had some thoughts on this matter, but it was just an assumption. She couldn't confirm them with anything. And since this time nothing worked out, they will definitely try again. But this was only to the girl's advantage, because next time she will be stronger. Noticing the knight riding his horse through the forest, the maid announced that the festival was over. Climbing on top of the maid sisters, Cian informed them that they needed to get back as quickly as possible before Dad arrived. So after some time they were already in the tent where Cian was supposed to wait for her father. Having arrived at her rightful place, the little girl was glad that Daddy was not there yet. Sitting down on the sofa, she could finally relax and think about what her father might have caught. After some time, the girl noticed that her father had returned. Now she was calm about his life. Noticing him in the distance, Cian called out to her father, getting his attention. Hearing the little girl calling him, a smile immediately appeared on Matthias's face. On his shoulder, he carried the game he had managed to catch for his daughter. The baby was incredibly happy to see Daddy. He came back completely fine, and judging by the bag, he even caught something. The father demonstratively took a live, tied-up goblin out of the bag. Cian was stunned. She never thought that her father was capable of such actions. When she asked what it was, the girl replied, "It's a very small and cute goblin." He was glad to bring his daughter something so cute. He was proud of his gift. His friends said what a charming pet it was, and also a very nutritious, complete meal. But Cian couldn't say anything except that this goblin was very ugly. And he is also scary, and also small and weak in appearance. Instead of him, they should have caught something more frightening, the girl thought. Matthias realized that the girl didn't like Goblin, so he offered to show her what Dad had caught while hunting. Daddy promised that he caught something much cuter than what his friends had attached. Opening her palms, Cian saw something very small, light and fluffy in them. She was amazed. It caught her attention so much that she couldn't take her eyes off it. Daddy said it was a long-tailed tit, but it was still very small and looked like a fluffy ball. Cian really liked the gift for Daddy. She immediately pressed it to her cheek and said that she would take care of it. But suddenly she realized that the point of hunting was to catch something strong and show her strength. And the father continued to talk about how the cute one is actually much better than the big and scary beast. Prince Matthias boasted to his friends that he had been able to please his daughter. The little girl stood to the side and listened to her father talk about how cuteness reigns over everything. Cuteness rules the world. And the little titmouse looked out from the baby's hands, interested in what was happening around. The woman who sent the spies in was interested in why they had not returned yet. The thing she hated most in this life was waiting, so she wanted to hear news as soon as possible. After some time, having learned what had happened, she thought that perhaps it would be easier for her to go herself. In her head, it sounded very attractive and interesting. This way, she would be able to see Matthias's daughter herself. After the end of the hunting festival, they threw a grand feast, which included many delicacies. Peru had already begun. But Sian didn't understand why she was so terribly upset. What was wrong? The expression on her face really didn't show any joy or happiness. But she watched as the men in the distance greedily ate their food. She looked at her dad's friends, who in her eyes looked very scary and strange. Sighing heavily, she realized that she would have to protect them too. At this rate, Sian would soon become the youngest head of the family. Well, it's okay, because she was able to deal with the spies herself, and she knows that she has become stronger. The father, looking upset, asked why the little girl didn't want to eat. But everything was much simpler. It's just that Dad is a fool, and he didn't understand at all how Sian felt. The little girl asked to bring something cool from the tournament next time, for example, a lion or a dragon, although she was not sure that her dad and his friends would be able to catch something like that. Matthias didn't understand why his daughter wanted such scary monsters, but his friends said that this was exactly his specialty. In order not to attract the little girl's attention, Matthias stepped on his subordinate's foot under the table. I kept asking my daughter to eat well, as she needed to eat a lot to grow, and he also didn't want her to think about scary lions and dragons. Sian, chewing meat, continued to repeat that her father did not understand her, even though she was small and did not look like a gray cardinal, but she got rid of the spies. Suddenly, Sian thought about what she could tell her dad that she had caught the spies. So, sitting at the table, Sian began to tell that spies had come here while Dad was away. Matthias's face immediately changed. Was his daughter really talking about bad uncles? Dad's face turned terribly pale. To soften the situation, Sian decided to say that the maids had chased them away, so Dad had no reason not to worry. Matthias began to look intimidating, twirling the knife in his hand. He was already thinking about who could have done this. So, in a quiet and deep voice, Daddy turned to his daughter, wanting to tell her something. Hugging his daughter, Matthias promised that this would never happen again, and he also asked if Sian was very scared. But the little girl answered negatively, saying that she was not at all scared. She asked her dad to collect his thoughts, since they are now in a state of emergency. Matthias continued to press his daughter to his chest, talking about what a terrible family this was. He also wondered how his little girl found out that they were not in the best situation now. To calm her father down, Sian hit him on the head, saying that it was better to spend time training than hunting rabbits. Matthias was glad to see his daughter so cheerful, confident, strong. Don't lift her up in your arms, above your head. Matthias wanted to look his daughter in the eyes. He said that all Sian needed to do was think positively because Dad would make sure that everyone in the family became good people. That's why he asked, with a soldier's expression on his face, not to worry about anything. Looking at her father, Sian realized that her father had not understood a word of what she had said to him, and so making a villain out of her father would have to be put off for now. The hunting festival came to an end. Evening came. The stars already covered the sky. Sian, lying on the sofa, thought about what happened today. The maids who stood behind her wondered what the young lady was thinking about. Although Sian was actually thinking about her father's defenseless friends, she decided not to tell the maids. Daddy's friends just look big, but they just bark and don't bite, just like Daddy. She hoped they would have some wildness in them, but they were just a bunch of weaklings who liked everything cute, just like Daddy. Unexpectedly, the maid brought a gift. It was from Mr. Matthias's friends. They had prepared a gift, especially for her. Handing the little girl a box with a bow, the maid suggested opening the gift. Sian decided to open the gift. The girl hoped that there was something useful in it. Upon seeing the contents of the gift, the little girl assumed that it was a cursed rabbit doll. The maid noted that this doll was sewn by Mr. Matthias's friends themselves, which was very nice for them. After all, these huge guys sewed this tiny doll with their huge hands. Sian couldn't even imagine a future where she would be supporting them. Seeing how the young lady began to feel sad, the maids wanted to know what was the reason for the mistress's upset. After asking about the spies who had attacked the young lady some time ago, Sian learned that they were dead. But the maids asked not to be upset as they cautiously requested information from the press family. The press family was quite good at gathering information. They also reported that they already had leads. Hugging her new toy, Sian talked about what a joy it was. Finally, after a long time, the maids decided to introduce themselves. One of them was named Bench from the press family, and the other one with blonde hair, Deadly, from the FT family. The little girl began to remember these names from the novel she had read during her first life. And she also believed that it was her maids who sounded incredibly absurdly strong. Suddenly, her vision cleared and she remembered a very important detail. Maids in aristocratic houses usually give up their names and can only be addressed by their title, so they reveal their first and last name. It is practically a lifelong oath of allegiance. And the maid sisters were incredibly happy to introduce themselves to their mistress personally. Sian was touched that the maids were so loyal to her, entrusting her with their first and last names. The little girl thanked the maids for revealing their names. Now she would rely on them. The maids were very happy about this. One of them asked if the young lady had an appointment for tomorrow. Having completely forgotten about it, Sian remembered this important event. She remembered that she was in the middle of an important mission, a mission to save the Mirmod family. And one of the most important tasks is tomorrow's meeting with the Holy Knight. After all, she had to make him hers no matter what. In this way, the young lady was going to save not only herself, but also her father. In the novel, there was a scene of a clash between Ted and Axel. Many suffered at the hands of Axel, but Ted was different from them. He possessed outstanding holy power and was the only one capable of resisting Axel. Due to some sudden intervention, the match ended in a draw, but readers were impressed. Sian believed that if it weren't for this intervention, Ted would have definitely defeated Axel, so she had to win him over. Sighing heavily, Sian knew that she couldn't do it exactly like in the original story, so winning Ted over wouldn't be easy. She needs to remember the description of the child in the novel, the worn clothes, the downcast and sad eyes, the scars all over his body. The only thing that stands out about the child is his blue eyes, sparkling like sapphires. Sian remembered him so well because he looked like her in the past. Since he is a child and might end up in an orphanage, Sian must save him. Cats that screamed at every opportunity and also looked at everyone as their prey. The crows that were sitting on the clotheslines. This is all the slum area on Felrod Street. The young lady disguised herself as a commoner so as not to stand out. The maid sisters were wondering where Lady Sian was planning to go. Even though the area was dangerous, Sian wasn't afraid to ask people around her about the child she was looking for. In her eyes, it was like an adventure that we were going through with interest. Before their uncle could ask the question, they themselves noticed children wandering around here alone. Taking out their knives, the men wanted to attack the children, justifying themselves by saying that it was a dangerous place. One of the maids stepped forward, wanting to deal with the troublemakers, but Sian suggested that they simply ignore them. Without thinking twice, the maid quickly agreed with the mistress's proposal. Noticing that they were being ignored, the men immediately began to complain, but Sian and her maid sisters simply walked away. This further irritated the men, who were already preparing to attack the children by smashing the bottle into pieces. Having swung at one of the maids, who looked like a child under her cloak, the man did not understand what a gross mistake he was making. After such a rude outburst, the maid simply had no other choice, so she began to adjust her gloves. These women always did everything in their power, regardless of the opponent, so the man now received the strongest blow of his life, the strongest blow of his life. Having knocked out a couple of their front teeth, these sisters still don't know what moderation is. Thus, the maids quickly dealt with the unwanted ones. And Sian just stood at a distance and watched as the maid sisters beat up the men. A little to the side, Sian noticed a little boy. She found it interesting. She thought that perhaps this was a child from the orphanage, which meant he could be Ted's brother. Suddenly, Sian noticed that there was something written on the basket, so she turned her attention to it. And I saw a sign that said that this basket was from the Rukri shelter. It's impossible for a poor area to have multiple orphanages, so this child must be related to the Holy Knight's brother. By pointing her finger at this boy, Sian was saying that she wanted to talk to this child. Having greeted them in a friendly manner, the little girl immediately said that they were looking for someone on this street. Even though Sian and her maid sisters weren't bad people, the boy was still scared. Something had to be done quickly, so Sian took out a bunch of candies from her pocket. Holding them out to him, she offered the candies, saying how incredibly delicious they were. It was clear that the boy wanted to try the candy, but he was very afraid. An ordinary city with ordinary people, and in the middle of the city, there was a church. Sitting on the bench, Sian asked the boy if he knew where the shelter was, to which the boy replied yes, and also told her that he had gone out to find food. Then Sian decided to turn to the baby, asking for his help in finding shelter. The boy was amazed and also wondered why the girl was calling him baby, since he looked older. Sian continued to convince the boy that only he could help her. Her eyes lit up. She felt she was close to her goal. The boy timidly decided to agree to help Sian, although he was not sure that he could. In the dialogue, Sian noticed that the boy's eyes were shining blue. Could he be that same child? Thinking about this, she began to ask the boy whether he had lived in an orphanage from the very beginning, to which the little boy answered positively, saying that he had never had a family. It seems that Sian has stumbled upon a very important clue. She sympathized with the boy and asked him not to be sad. Still, this didn't match the original, because there the younger brother knew about the older one and was waiting for him. After some time, the children reached the shelter. It was a scary and dark place, practically in the middle of the forest. The children no longer lived there because the shelter was closed, and the children went their separate ways. The boy realized that the girl in front of him was looking for someone, to which Sian responded positively. Looking down, it was clear he was upset. It was hard to imagine how lonely this little boy was. How sad. This child was abandoned by his own family and lived alone in the ruins. Sian could not leave such a child alone on the street, as she felt sympathy for him. Therefore, she invited the boy to go with her, which surprised everyone who remained. The boy was worried because he believed that he was good for nothing and therefore would definitely become a burden. But Sian thought that this was not a problem because children should be happy, so she continued to invite the boy with her. The baby heard the word happiness for the first time. He so wanted to feel what it was like to be happy. So, without thinking twice, with a smile on his face, he decided to agree to Sian's proposal. It was a great decision, but the little girl still had to meet someone. It's almost time to meet Ted. He will be very upset if Sian doesn't find his brother, so you need to meet him and ask for some more time. But as soon as the little girl met Ted, she learned that the Holy Knight had already found his brother. Sian noticed tears on the man's cheeks, but she didn't understand who he was crying for. And the young boy who stood next to the lady asked the Holy Knight, "Who are you?" The boy spoke harshly that he had no family, which broke the Holy Knight's heart into pieces. And only Sian didn't understand what was happening, why this little boy didn't recognize Ted as his brother. A few minutes ago, Sian suddenly remembered her meeting with Ted, grabbed the baby by the hands, and rushed to the meeting place. Sian had to grab the boy's hand tightly and drag him along with her to meet the Holy Knight. The kid was confused, as he didn't even have time to figure out where and why he was being taken. But looking down, he claimed that he also wanted to become a Holy Knight. Sian was shocked by such words because she saw the boy talking about a dream, but his face at that moment was so sad. Instead of dwelling on it, Sian decided to support the boy, saying that he would definitely succeed. But she couldn't understand what happened when Ted and the boy met, why the baby had such a reaction, questions. Ted, with a guilty face, tried to explain himself to the little boy, convincing him that he had never abandoned him. The boy did not want to listen to the words of the Holy Knight because he knew that his brother had abandoned him, leaving him alone. The Holy Knight tried to explain to the boy that this was all a misunderstanding, but the little boy did not believe a single word. Sian led them into an alley, thinking that they would be less likely to attract prying eyes. Instead of a warm reunion between the brothers, they spent a long time arguing with each other, and Sian was very upset about this, hanging her head. And the boy continued to say the same thing, because he believed that by abandoning him, his brother became a Holy Knight. Ted didn't expect to hear this. It seemed like at that moment his heart broke into 1,000 pieces. The man fell to his knees and began to ask for forgiveness, as at that moment he was poor and could not find his brother, Ashida. Seeing that the dialogue between the two brothers is not going well, Sian decides to intervene to help them. She decided to set the record straight, so she asked if Ted had ever abandoned his brother. The man replied that this had never happened, and that all this time he had been looking for a younger man. Constantly, in the same place, because Ted knew that his brother was incapable of going anywhere else. Watching Ted tell his story so pitifully, Sian realized that the knight's feelings were sincere. But the baby doesn't know this. Sian read the novel and knew Ted's feelings. But Ashida's feelings she didn't understand. She also noticed how Ashid was trembling, overwhelmed with feelings and emotions. Perhaps he was scared because he was afraid of being abandoned again. Sian realized that it took time. Having attracted attention, Sian announced that she had a proposal. The little girl decided to take care of Ted's brother. She wanted to give Ashid some time, and then they would meet again in about 2 weeks. Ted was shocked because he did not expect Lady Mermaid to take care of his little brother. He didn't think it was possible since Ashid was his younger brother, but Sienna kept insisting because she thought the boy needed time, and she also wanted him to have a choice. Ashid stood timidly in front of them, his head down, it was obvious how difficult it was for him to make the right decision. It seemed that he was very afraid to speak about his choice, not wanting to upset his brother. So they finally understood each other, and Ashid was already getting into the carriage of the young Lady Mirmad. Ted, watching his brother leave, asked Cien to take care of him because he felt some kind of responsibility. The man also promised that if Lady Mirmad did this, he would become her debtor for life. But Cien, looking into the eyes of the Holy Knight, said that she would take care of Ashida, and it would not be in order to win Ted. She also asked him to come to her in 2 weeks, but the man could not answer for sure. He only promised that he would think about it. Bowing his head, the Holy Knight claimed that he would never forget Lady Sienna's kindness for the rest of his life. Sitting in the carriage and waving to Ted, Cien hoped that the relationship between the brothers would improve. It was good that she was able to take Ashida with her. In preparation for Axel's threats and potential attacks, it seems that Cien will be able to create an effective fortress. Ashid, looking at the heroine, thanked her for taking him with her. It meant a lot to him. But suddenly, Cien was overcome with guilt due to ulterior motives, and her little heart was not so innocent. Grabbing Ashida's hands, Cien promised that she would take care of the boy, so she wished him a happy life. With a smile on her face, Cien claimed that this was her sincere intention. The boy was amazed at first. He didn't even know how to react to such kind and sincere words. And then he smiled brightly, realizing that from that moment on his life would become truly happy. The maid sisters who were watching this couldn't hold back their tears. The scene was so sweet. Cien had already decided that the first thing they should do upon arrival was to get Ashida in order. Meanwhile, Matthias walked through the dark corridors of Mirmad Castle, dealing with his opponents. The bandits who tried to kidnap Cien were already in the dungeon under guard. They said that it was a small demon who grabbed them. Matthias didn't like people who were too noisy, so wanting to achieve silence as quickly as possible, he gave the order to the knight who was the guard of these catacombs, where many who were objectionable to the Mirmad family died. Clenching his fist, Matthias couldn't understand how these men dared to call his beloved daughter a demon. A gentle creature who wouldn't even hurt a fly, a precious child full of love, that's what Matthias's daughter was. But the problems only increased because even Delphia is involved in the struggle for the place of heir. Delia Mirmad, Axel Mirmad, the Senate, as well as the imperial family and the Pope associated with the imperial power. They all need to be destroyed without a trace, but one wrong step and nothing will come of it, so Matthias must be very careful. When making his plan, Matthias already knew that he would first deal with the woman, Delphia. She was a powerful magician, but not invulnerable. The real problem was Axel, who was incredibly strong and only true holy knights could compete with him. This was a problem because Matthias had not yet found a way to deal with him, and time was running out. Suddenly, hearing his daughter's voice, Matthias put aside all thoughts about fighting villains. His little girl, with one hand, took away all the problematic thoughts. He thought only about her. Holding Ashida's hand, she asked him to say hello and introduce himself to his father. But it seems the father was not prepared for his daughter to bring a boy into the house so early. And Stan continued to say that this was her new friend, whom she met in the slum area. She also said that she was going to make Ashida her cute little subordinate. Here is his father's first opponent. Matthias did not expect that his own daughter would inflict such a serious injury on him. He already had a lot of problems, and now this. The children are growing up, Matthias. You won't even notice how she'll turn 18 and get married. The baby continued to embrace her new friend, wanting her father to accept Ashida. Matthias saw how happy Stan was to have her new friend, so he knew there was nothing he could do about it. He didn't like this state of affairs, but he couldn't refuse his daughter, so he decided to allow her to leave him in the outbuilding. Suddenly, with a smile on his face, he said, "Yes, it is really tiring." Apparently, he was mistaken because of the huge flow of thoughts. Noticing how Cien reacted to this, Matthias immediately corrected himself, saying that he would give such a cute little one a whole room. After receiving permission from her dad, Cien began to jump happily, as her happiness knew no bounds. But still, even if Ashid was a child, Matthias couldn't help but suspect him, and he also already considered him his rival. Moreover, when Ashida had such a look as if he was looking at his favorite toy, all this made his father wary. He has enough of one enemy, the one in the mask, and now this little one. Suddenly, even though Ashida was scared, he decided that he needed to say something. Ashid wanted to tell Cien and her father that he would be a useful person. even though it didn't sound very confident. Sien, hearing this, began to hope that Ashid wasn't worried that he would be abandoned here too. Matthias, noticing his little girl with such a lonely face, did not know what to say and how to support his daughter. So, holding out his hand to his daughter, the father called her to dinner, wondering if anything else had happened today. And when Matthias heard that Sien had saved an adult knight today, tears began to roll down his face. This touched his heart because the little girl said that her dad was her only knight. But Sien started saying that it wasn't dad, but a real knight, and that Matthias was just a foundling. Matthias began to ask who it was, to which his daughter decided to answer that it was a secret. So for the first time in a long time, the father received incredible damage from his own daughter, while she was calling Ashida to play hunting. And when she said it would be a goblin hunt, Matthias took another point of damage. Sien and Ashid decided that after dinner they would go catch goblins, and when they caught them, they would definitely finish them off. Yes, Daddy, it's time to get your buns in shape, because your sweet little daughter has changed. What else awaits you? But Matthias didn't want to believe it. He thought that his daughter was fine and couldn't change. The real problem was the Mirmod clan. We'll have to dig into what's going on with Sien completely. After some time, the sun was already setting and dinner was over. Thanking for the food, the children got up from the table. So, going out into the palace garden, Sien and Ashid were ready to play goblin hunting, with their maid sisters standing nearby to protect them. Looking around, Sien didn't understand where the goblins had gone, but she asked her father's subordinates to release them nearby. Suddenly the maids heard the news, so they decided to inform the mistress that there were difficulties with the goblin hunt. Sien was very surprised. Clenching her fists near her chest, she did not understand the reasons. The maids continued their report, and the young lady learned that it was her father who had ordered the destruction of all the goblins, since keeping them in the mansion was unacceptable. Daddy can't accept the fact that his daughter is growing up, so he will interfere with Siena's interests. But Sien thought that most likely, Dad just felt sorry for the goblins after all. His heart is too soft. But with a soft heart like Matthias, surviving in this house won't be easy. Instead of goblins, Mr. Matthias ordered that Sien be given this cute cat. The little girl liked him right away. The hearts in her eyes spoke volumes about how much she was attracted to this white cat. But the cat was completely useless in developing strength. She is a child who will become a villain. Cats are not suitable for Sien. She needed goblins, tigers, lions, anything she could train with. Suddenly, she noticed Ashid looking at the kitten. It was amazing, because it was the first time he saw a white cat. It is not surprising that this is the first time he sees a snow-white cat, because only dirty cats live on the streets of Felward. Seeing how much Ashida liked the kitten, Sien began to think about giving up goblin hunting. So, after some time, the young lady decided to give up her job of hunting goblins in favor of the cat. Sitting on the bench, they began to introduce each other. Ashid learned that his savior's name was Sien. While the children were talking, the maid sisters were working out, lifting dumbbells with one hand and lifting a barbell. Ashid believed that he had no name, because he was a homeless street child abandoned by everyone. Then Sien thought that maybe Ashid didn't want to use his name because of his brother. And asking whether Ashid hated Ted very much, the boy answered positively, because his brother abandoned him. But Sien knew that Ted hadn't abandoned Ashida, and it was hard for her to explain it on someone else's behalf. Looking at Sien, Ashid timidly asked if the girl wanted to give Ted a chance to explain everything, to which Sien responded negatively. Because Ashid is a child, he should do what he wants, and the hard things can be left for later. Ashid thought that Sien brought him to the house to give Ted a chance to justify himself, which is why he was so surprised. The little girl tried to explain that this was not so. She had personal motives. Seeing a little boy covered in scars from being abandoned, she couldn't stay away. Sien saw herself in him before she met her father, so she didn't turn away. She wants to show Ashida all the good things that are in this world. She wanted the boy to be happy, just like she was able to smile when she met a good dad. So, sitting on the bench, Sien confessed her true intentions to Ashida. This confused the boy, but he still did not fully understand what it meant to be happy. Tears began to well up in his eyes, as this was the first time he heard someone wishing him happiness. It was like he was in a dream. It was hard for the boy to believe it, but it was still reality. Oh, it seems that Sien overdid it and the baby started crying. Now she needed to calm him down. It was too sentimental, so Cian jumped off the bench and suggested playing a power game. Extending her hand to him and inviting him to come with her, she said that they could play something scary to build up their courage. Ashid was so touched by this that at first he couldn't reach out his hand to Cian. But a little later, he decided that if it was with Cian, then he was ready to go with her even to the ends of the earth. Holding balloons filled with water, they reminded many of this childhood game. During hot summer months, kids often go outside to throw water bombs at each other. Matthias watched from the second-floor window as the children frolicked. It was better than hunting goblins. The Duke understood that the naive and sincere Cian could not be seriously interested in goblins, rather. It was a childish interest. A few seconds later, the Duke's assistant entered his office. It was so fast that it seemed as if he had teleported. The assistant reported that the spy they sent to the Holy Knight was quickly neutralized. Matthias realized that the Holy Knight that Cian spoke of was indeed strong. Holy Knight Ted, hearing his name from Cian, Matthias immediately sent an assassin to him. He was afraid that Ted had bewitched the innocent Cian, but it seems that the real knight his daughter chose has outstanding abilities. The assistant also handed over the letter that the Holy Knight Ted had given. Opening the letter, Matthias began to read Ted's message. If the killer was so inconspicuous, then he was sent by Matthias Mirmod himself, Cian Mirmod's father. Ted hoped that the Duke was not offended that the killer was eliminated. Reading the message, Matthias was still irritated. This owner could not trust his daughter to anyone. And also in this letter, it was reported that the Holy Knight Ted never thought of harming Lady Mirmod. On the contrary, he wanted to be useful to her. At least in these words, Ted was absolutely sincere. He swore before God that they were true. Holy Knight Ted wrote that he seemed ready to take the knight's oath. Matthias was surprised, because this was the first time in the Mirmod family that a holy knight would swear an oath to villains. The Duke was interested in how Ted was able to recognize the killer, to which the assistant replied that the Holy Knight was very skilled in his craft. The power of the Mirmod clan was based on darkness and was naturally quite vulnerable to divine power. To counter Axel Mirmod, they needed a man with outstanding holy power, and coincidentally, the poet picked the right man. Matthias didn't understand if it was a coincidence. How could this even happen? Everything looked too good. This cannot be, and should not be, because his daughter knows nothing about the struggle of the heirs. She should be like sunlight, pure and serene. Placing a piece of paper on the table, Matthias reported that everyone was talking about the return of Delphia Mirmod, and as soon as this woman arrived at the estate, Matthias ordered the attack to begin. At that moment, Cian ran into her father's room, saying that she was bored. The little girl wanted to look at the goblin. Having burst into the office, the little girl noticed that she had interrupted some conversation. Seeing this scene in her father's office, Cian realized what she might have interfered with. So, taking her father by surprise, she asked him what he was doing there, why the man was kneeling in front of him. She became so curious about what was going on that the little girl ran up to her father, showing interest in an event that is happening here and now. There was an awkward silence. Matthias couldn't come up with an excuse for this picture of events. Standing in front of the men, Cian assumed that this uncle was kneeling down and asking to buy potatoes. The father was incredibly happy that his daughter had not guessed his true nature, so he simply played along with what Cian had come up with. This wasn't the first time this had happened, so Cian puffed out her cheeks, knowing that her dad had bought something at an inflated price again. Pointing her finger at the man, young Mrs. Mirmod asked how much the potatoes cost. Puffing out her cheeks once again, she wanted to hear the answer to her question as soon as possible. The man was enchanted by this cute little lady, so much so that his eyes lit up. Because of her cuteness, he couldn't answer right away, and Cian continued to demand the price of the potatoes. The little girl also convinced others that, unlike her father, she was very scary. Matthias thought that this was child's play. Seeing Cian swear, Matthias saw how much influence the Mirmod family had on his daughter. The Duke's subordinate did not know the exact price of potatoes or even the approximate price, so he found it difficult to answer. Matthias, showing secret signs, told his subordinate to answer as he felt. So the man decided to answer that it was about 1 silver coin for 100 potatoes. Approaching her father, Cian said that it seemed like they were dealing with a complete fool, not a merchant, since potatoes usually cost 1 silver coin for 10 pieces. She felt sorry for this foolish merchant, so she offered to buy it at a normal price, to which Matthias immediately agreed. But Cian wanted to know why Dad needed potatoes, since he was no longer a farmer. He was an important man now. It seems that now Matthias found himself in a difficult situation, because he did not know what to answer his daughter. After a while, she realized that he just wanted to gain muscle mass too. Matthias didn't understand anything, but was glad that his daughter had relieved him of the problematic issue. Why exactly pump up, you ask? Because the maids only eat potatoes and chicken breast. That's why they're so cool. The Duke was glad that Cian had such strong and truly useful maids. Taking his daughter in his arms, he sent her to change clothes and then offered her a delicious dessert. The subordinate, who had been watching Lord Matthias interact with his daughter the entire time, was shocked. He had never seen him like this before, so he decided to leave as quickly as possible so as not to disturb the master. So they were left alone, no one bothered them anymore, and they could enjoy each other. Matthias carefully adjusted his daughter's hair, looking at her with love and affection. They haven't had such a peace for a long time, and maybe after this they won't have it for even longer, because they are facing a big war. Quietly, Matthias turned to his daughter, wanting to give her a few words of advice for the near future. He wanted Cian to know that if a woman named Delphia approached her, she should run away immediately. Looking at her father with an innocent look, the little girl wondered why. To which the father replied, "This woman is incredibly dangerous and can harm Cian, so you need to listen to Dad." The little girl began to answer her father when they were interrupted by a loud sound from the corridor. Cian didn't understand what that sound was, and Matthias was very annoyed by it, so he wanted to punish the culprits. But the girl couldn't leave things as they were. She wanted to understand the situation. Jumping out of her father's arms and apologizing to him, she rushed off to sort things out. And there will be treats next time. Matthias was so upset about this that it seemed he was expecting treats, not Cian. That's how his own daughter left her father, leaving him alone with his own thoughts. It was such a rare time when they could be alone together, but sorry, Matthias, the boys were more important. The maids, watching the young mistress run along the corridors on her tiny legs, asked her to be more careful. Cian heard the servants say something worriedly, but that was not the most important thing for her right now. She recognized that voice, so she had to rush to help. Ashid and Leonard were arguing, which was the reason why Cian couldn't stop. Remembering the look on her father's face before she ran away, she felt a pang of conscience. Cian understood that most likely her father would be offended at her for running away like that. But there was no choice. These are children she cannot miss, because only thanks to them does Cian have a chance to survive. After some time, the baby, on her tiny legs, was able to run to the boys. She held her hand out in an attempt to stop what she thought was an inevitable fight. Ashid supported Cian while she was resting after a long run, and she also asked if they wanted to fight. The boy with blue eyes did not know how to answer this question. Just like Leonardo, who stood and looked at the boy with an aggressive gaze. Pointing at Ashida, Leonardo wanted to know why he called Cian a nut. From such a rude tone, Cian and Ashid became scared, which is why they grabbed each other's hands and hugged. Cian assumed that Ashid didn't know Leonardo before, who was used to such rude statements. Perhaps that's why he was scared. With that creepy mask and gruff tone, Leonardo looked like a true son of villains. The little girl kept thinking about how nice it would be if Ashid and Leonardo became friends. So, without thinking twice, Cian decided to introduce Ashida, who is now her friend, and he will also now live in their house. Leonardo crossed his arms over his chest and asked if he wanted to be friends with him, to which Cian responded positively. The little girl didn't understand why Leonardo looked so angry, because she had already explained everything to him. But then an unexpected question followed. Leonardo wanted to know who he was to Sienna. Poo, what questions have come up? Is he jealous or something? At such an age, young people mature quickly these days. With a smile on her face, Cian admitted that Leonardo was also her best friend. The guy clearly didn't like the status of best friend, so he clenched his cheeks and got upset. Cian thought that she could solve the problem this way, but it wasn't that simple. After all, Leonardo decided that he would try to become the closest person to Cian, and he would also do everything to be better than the one with whom the baby lives. The girl did not expect such a turn of events. She did not understand what kind of possessive look it was. But since her future villain promises to become her close person, Cian could only be incredibly happy. Ashid simply watched silently the whole time without saying a word. But he decided to be bolder, so he told Cian that he would also try. Now they really were rivals with Leonardo. Cian was still happy as she gained more and more allies. And since they had already strengthened their friendship, Cian suggested going out for a bite to eat. While the little girl was giving commands to the servants, a man approached her. By calling out to the girl, he forced her to turn towards him. From the voice, Cian immediately realized that it was her dad who had come to visit the children. He came to pick up his baby because they had an agreement. They agreed to eat a lot of different delicious things together, but Cian replied that she was busy right now. She told her father that today she wanted to eat delicious things with friends. Matthias was so upset that tears rolled down his cheeks because he didn't know who he would eat with then. The skill, Dad's sobs, was activated. The effect was devastating. Cian couldn't resist it. Besides, she hadn't spent much time with her father lately. Cian couldn't upset her father like that. Turning to the boys, Cian apologized as she decided to eat some delicious food with the Duke after all. And since Leonardo and Ashid had made up, perhaps it was better to leave them alone, Cian thought. Matthias carried his daughter away, and Cian, saying goodbye to the boys, asked them not to quarrel anymore. So the boys were left alone, in complete silence. True rivals. Leonardo didn't understand why he behaved like that because it looked like jealousy. It's all because Leonardo believed that he was the only one with the nut, and that's why he flared up. Although, to be honest, seeing how Ashid was staying close to Cian, something in Leonardo's chest skipped a beat. But what is more important now is that he and Ashid have a common enemy, that is Matthias Mirmod. The strongest in these parts, and he usually doesn't pay attention to children like Ashida. Ashid didn't understand this, because he saw how the Duke looked at Lady Cian with such affection and care. Leonardo admitted that Matthias Mirmod was actually threatening Cian, as she herself told him. Cian is now going into the thick of things for them. She left because she was afraid that Matthias Mirmod would simply make prey of them. And since Ashid had decided to stay by Cian's side, he too had to take Leonardo's side and protect her. The boy realized that this was apparently his chance to repay Mrs. Cian. Thus, he wanted to be of service to Cian, who extended a helping hand to him. Determined, they united for one enemy, to protect the one who was so dear to them. Male friendship has been established. Now it's time to have some tea. The next day, in the Myrmidov mansion, it was surprisingly somehow too calm. On this day, the ladies of Delphi were supposed to arrive. About the second one, Matthias told and warned. This woman with snow-white hair got out of the carriage and showed off her beauty. Delphia Mirmod returns to the family nest, which she was incredibly happy about, because the fun days are just beginning. Leading the mistress along the corridor of the castle, the maids immediately began to inquire whether Lady Delphia should prepare a bath. But Delphia wasn't interested in that, and if this was her servant, she should have asked about the soldiers' training first. Unexpectedly, the lady saw what she had fallen in love with so much that she liked it so much. The monsters in the form of stuffed animals looked incredibly beautiful, and Delphia went crazy about them. Of all the stuffed animals, she liked the leopard the most, which was truly beautiful. Turning the monsters she likes into stuffed animals and exhibiting them is a hobby of Mrs. Delphia Mirmod. Having admired the stuffed animals, Delphia immediately asked if her servants had collected all the necessary information on Cian Mirmod. She wanted to know everything, where she goes, who she contacts. It was important for her. Sitting down in her rightful place, Delphia had no intention of taking the children into account. Although Leonardo had great potential, he was still weaker than Delphia Mirmod, so he did not pose a threat. But the fact that Cian was dating Duchess Rukella was already more interesting. Delphia was interested in what connected them. To which the maid replied that Madame Rukella and Cian had a cool relationship, and that the Duchess did not really like children. This made Delphia think, it turns out the little girl doesn't have any special patrons. Fired up by the idea, Delphia got up from her chair and decided to visit the Duchess in person. The maid was so bold that she again offered a bath. Apparently the mistress smelled. But Delphia could not contain her curiosity. She wanted to meet the Duchess as soon as possible. Mrs. Rukella's mansion, where each family member has their own mansion, is not bad. Mrs. Rukella was in her garden, picking a bouquet of roses and licorice. Delphia quickly rushed to the lady, wanting to know how she was doing. The Duchess was not particularly pleased with Delphia and called her an adopted guest. Delphia tried to joke sarcastically, trying to prick her mistress a little. The Duchess appeared to be practicing the noble art of ikebana, but these flowers were poisonous enough to kill a person. Yes, they really did have something in common. Delphia continued to provoke the mistress by insulting her home and hobbies. But Rukella believed that living in peace was better than living in the wilderness and hunting monsters. Tired of this empty talk, Rukella got straight to the point, wanting to know the reason for the visit. Delphia continued to drag out time, smiling slyly, which brought her true pleasure. And as soon as she said the name Sian Mirmod, Duchess Rukella's hands trembled. Delphia's little amusement was also Matthias's weak spot, and she wondered how the lady would react to it. But the Duchess's hand didn't just twitch, she tore the carefully selected flower into pieces. And she threw it at Delphia as a sign of threat. Now it is clear to her how Rukella treats Sienna. The woman wondered if this was a challenge to a duel or a warning about murder. Throwing a poisonous plant is a kind of challenge to a duel in high society. Just as knights throw a sword, ladies throw flowers. Mrs. Rukella was serious and warned not to touch this child. It was impossible for Delphia that such a cold woman would try to contain her anger because of some little boy. It was strange, because Delphia believed that Duchess Rukella did not like children. She always became tense at the sight of them. And then there was this reaction. Could Sian Mirmod really have charmed the Duchess? Having warned Delphia, Rukella had nothing more to say, so she sent the woman away. She couldn't have this dirty dust in the house any longer, she said in a furious tone. Delphia found it hard to believe that such an old woman, who was staring at her like that, could be charmed by a child he would most likely wet himself from fear. Still sitting, Delphia wondered if this child was really Matthias's daughter. Maybe she is not Matthias's daughter at all. Maybe he just picked her up, wanting to please the woman he loved. And if she is not a biological daughter, is she worth protecting like that? Delphia wondered again. From warnings, Rukella went on the offensive, wanting to punish the unwanted one. After she pressed on the stem of the poisonous flower, Delphia felt a sharp, unpleasant smell. Not understanding what this smell was, she began to have something similar to an acute allergic reaction. It was poison. Rukella thus showed that she would not repeat it 3 times. The lady really didn't repeat herself, she just acted immediately, thereby driving Delphia out of her house. For an old woman, Rukella didn't have the best character a little more, and Delphia would have died right there. So the Duchess really does value Sian Mirmod. The woman was interested in how this child managed to tame the Duchess. The more Delphia learned about this child, the more interested she became in him. She had never been interested in children in her life, so she thought there was definitely something in this child. But she was glad, because she had not experienced such feelings and emotions of excitement before the unknown for a long time. With a smile on her face, without giving up her attempts, Delphia immediately asked where Sian Mirmod was now. According to the latest data, Sian was in the happiness group at the Manhwa Children's Academy, which Delphia was surprised by. Happiness. This inspired her immensely, so she headed to Manhwa Academy. At this time, in the academy, Sienna sat with her cheeks puffed out. She didn't understand why she had to be in such a place at all, especially with her dad, where she was learning a lesson on how to be a good child. The little girl was just fooled because she was on her way to eat some treats with her dad and ended up in class. Having woken up his little girl in the morning, Matthias immediately offered her to eat all sorts of delicious things. But in the end, I ended up in a class for good children at the Malone Academy, the so-called happiness course. Now it's time for soul-cleansing meditation. Everyone closes their eyes, inhale through the nose, and exhale through the mouth. Every person is beautiful in their own way. In this course, you will learn to love people. Stan didn't like it. She thought that people were evil, and she was the strongest among them. The little girl was going to become the greatest villain. Turning to the baby, Daddy asked if Sian really thought people were beautiful. For her, her father's kindness was too bright. Sian couldn't look at her father because of all this kindness. Those who are in trouble need to lend a helping hand, meet with friends, and take care of their loved ones and relatives. Matthias wanted his girl to grow up kind, but Sian herself didn't want this, and her look was stubborn. Sian believed that since Dad became the heir to the villainous Mirmod family, it meant that he should now stand above all villains. You can't just look at the world through rose-colored glasses, but in her dad's current state, he was too kind, Sian thought. Sighing heavily, Sian was afraid that if this continued, she might become kind too. In these lessons, Leonardo and Ashid were with her, and they fell asleep peacefully at the beginning of the lesson. But Sian was wondering why they were sleeping, whether the guys had been doing something at night. Shaking her head from side to side, she drove these thoughts away, since now was not the time to think about it. Sian was worried that if Matthias continued to become a sunny character, they would be finished. Last night, after Sian left, Leonardo and Ashid were left. Sitting at the same table, Leonardo told Ashida how weak he was. He needed to become stronger. These words upset the little boy because he didn't know how he could get incredible power to protect Sienna. Leonardo believed that only he could truly protect Cien, which is why Ashid should just listen. Ashida was sad because he couldn't object. Leonardo's words were true, so he didn't know what to do. Clenching his palms on his knees, the little boy was driven, thinking that he was useless. He wanted to protect Cien, even if he was just a kid from the street. He wanted to help her. He didn't have holy power like Ted, so Ashid started thinking about developing physical strength. Suddenly he stopped, and it dawned on Ashida. He had heard before that holy power was passed down through generations, so perhaps he possessed it too. Although holy power manifests itself at an early age, if it has not appeared yet, then the chances are slim. But he still thought about meeting Ted, the one who abandoned him. Ashid thought for so long yesterday that he went to bed very late and fell asleep in class. The teacher said that it is not necessary to become strong, because even weakness is beautiful in its own way. Ashid wondered how weakness could be beautiful at all, even if it was. Suddenly, he noticed how Cien turned her head towards him and looked at him. It seemed that with her green eyes, she looked straight into Ashida's soul. Such a piercing gaze. But only thanks to this, the baby gained the determination to become stronger, wanting to protect his dear friend. He didn't just have a goal, he had an incredibly high goal, because he wanted to become stronger than Matthias. After all, he wanted to protect Cien from everything that could threaten her, so he wanted to be useful to her. Everyone went outside as it was time for the next course, lunch, with the blessing they would try vegetarian food. Cien was already dreaming about when this course of happiness would end. Hearing that they had some free time until the food was brought, the little girl realized that this was her chance. Grabbing Ashida with one hand and Leonardo with the other, Cien planned something terrible, something that would hurt her dad. Asking him to wait with the food, Cien told her dad that she needed some time for the kids. Matthias tried to push himself, but Cien stopped him, saying that the dads shouldn't be with them. 10 minutes would be enough for them. Having escaped from her dad, Cien squatted down to catch her breath. The little girl was tired not only from the course, but also from running. The boys immediately started asking if Cien was okay, as she was acting very strange. But making a displeased face, she turned to her friends. Cien decided to tell them that from now on she would begin to re-educate her father. To join a villainous family means to find yourself in a situation where your life will be in constant danger, and yet he sent Cien to this academy to make her good. The boys took Cien's side and decided to help her. What did they really understand? And what they understood was that they needed to make Matthias good. What Cien meant was to re-educate Matthias so that he would become a villain. Well, they didn't quite understand each other as they should have. While Ashid stood timidly behind, Leonardo was already asking Sienna what they needed to do. After some time, Ashid suddenly shouted that he would also help Cien re-educate her father. And also, if he can develop holy power and use it, it will be very useful. Although he wasn't entirely sure that he had it, Ashid wanted to check. At that moment, Cien thought that she was ready to meet with Ted to talk about what happened. Ashida hadn't succeeded yet, but he didn't lose hope, and Sienna continued to believe in him and support him. And since they were now a team, Cien suggested bumping fists. The boys didn't understand why this was happening, so Cien explained that it was a promise to re-educate their dad. So everyone understood what it was for and clapped their little fists. Now they are definitely a team. After that, they stood in a circle and shouted, "Forward! The only thing missing is some kind of song." Having made a plan, Ashid already suggested going back as he wanted to eat. But Leonardo sensed something, so he couldn't help but report it to Cien. He felt an ominous energy somewhere nearby, which could only foretell trouble. Noticing this creepy bird on the tree, the children were not afraid, but came closer, starting to ask questions. Leonardo immediately began to say how unusual this bird was, because it emitted strong negative energy. The little girl became scared, because she understood who could own a bird with such power. But suddenly it dawned on her that it was possible to catch and tame such a bird, and then use it for her own purposes. Suddenly, a male voice was heard. It was Matthias calling Cien. The girl already knew that her father's face only looked like that when scoundrels took his money. Taking his daughter in his arms, Matthias told her that it was time for them to go home. Although the little girl didn't want to, she had to obey. Looking again at the tree branch where the bird was sitting, Cien noticed that it was no longer there. And Matthias said that training was over for today. Since he was being called out so rudely, he would have to fight seriously. As always, the adults talked about their problems, and the children about theirs. The boys were worried that they had already been exposed. Delphia sighed heavily, since it seemed that they had fallen for Matthias's bait. She also noted that one of the children emanated holy power. The woman kept wondering why only outstanding people gathered around Sienna, and the maid agreed with this, saying that such a child definitely could not be overlooked. Delphia noted that this girl was too interesting to just take and kill her. She wanted to get to know her better before Sian met Axel. Could it be that this child had charmed Delphia too? The maid sisters were already greeting the masters. They were glad that Sian and Matthias returned safe and sound. One of the maids reported that 2 letters had arrived for Sian, which surprised the girl. A letter from Ted Sian was just expecting. She was glad to hear from him. But the second was from Delphia Mermaud, which was incredibly surprising for Sian, because I didn't expect that this cruel woman could write a letter to Sian. Matthias was negative about this, as he understood the danger that Delphia Mermaud represented. Therefore, he offered to open the letter and read it, but the little girl doubted it, since this letter was for her. If it is from Delphia, then it may indeed be dangerous, but that is precisely why Sian must personally read it. Matthias did not give up. He continued to insist on his own, wanting to protect his daughter from danger. But the little girl believed that she was the very same evil child who knew the future, so she had to figure it out herself. So Sian started manipulating her dad, asking if he had been lying to her all this time. After all, Matthias himself told her that even a child's opinion cannot be ignored. Matthias understood that in this situation he could not give in to his daughter's provocations. He blamed himself for the fact that the little girl felt as if he had ignored her opinion. Reaching out to Matthias, Sian hugged him tenderly, apologizing for misunderstanding her dad. After they made up, Sian was finally able to read the letter and learn that Delphia was asking the little girl to invite her to a tea party. She also wrote that the baby should not be afraid of her, as she did not want to harm her. Sian didn't expect Delphia to come straight to her, and since there was such an attack, the girl had to prepare thoroughly. A few seconds later, Sian told her father that she wanted to have a tea party because she was an aristocrat. Matthias couldn't refuse his daughter, so he decided that they would meet with Delphia, and Matthias himself decided that he would prepare everything so that Sian would feel safe. After some time, Sian decided to open the letter from Ted. If the Holy Knight is on her side, even Delphia is not a problem. But the letter said that Lady Gabriella was insistently asking him to be her Holy Knight, so for a while, Ted would not be able to help Sian. However, when he can resolve everything, he will request an audience again to officially become Lady Sian's Holy Knight. Gabriella, this was the name Sian often heard from the young priests she met in the temple. They talked about how they would complain to her. Apparently, Gabriella has a high position. Could she do all this just to keep Ted as a holy knight? And if this is so, Sian will have to quarrel with her in order to defend the honor and freedom of her knight. Meanwhile, in the Temple of Sinoa, where the Holy Knight Ted is located, a man was preparing for a serious conversation. Gabriella, a priestess in training, who was already negatively disposed towards dialogue with Ted. Although she was just an intern, she possessed very strong divine energy. Even the Pope paid attention to her. Ted came to tell her that he could only accompany her on this trip, and after that, he had other commitments. Gabriella didn't like this very much. She didn't understand the reasons, because Ted was her knight. It was for this reason that she believed that Ted should serve only her and no one else. Ted apologized for his behavior and asked him to understand, because now he had someone he really wanted to protect. The priestess frowned. She clearly didn't like this news, because she was the owner. She also asked if this was really the child from the Mermaud family, to which the Holy Knight answered positively. Gabriella laughed at Sian, believing the dirty rumors. She continued to accept the lady from the Mermaud family. But Ted didn't just stand there. He started to defend Sian's honor, which surprised Gabriella greatly. Standing before the priestess, Ted convinced her what a kind and brave girl Sian Mermaud was. Gabriella was amazed by this, because no one had ever dared to contradict her like that before. Ted was not a man of many words, so without further ado he took his leave. The priestess trainee could not stand such a rude refusal. Out of anger, she clenched her small fist. In her thoughts, she was already cursing Sian Mermaud. Apparently, they couldn't avoid conflict. The Temple of Senoa existed for her alone. She walked around the halls, offering prayers to the god. She healed visitors with her powerful divine power, and her influence grew day by day. And this meant only one thing: no one in this place could go against her will. It was worth her teasing Cian a little, and immediately the young priests whom Gabriel was preparing to be her assistants were given only the right to serve. It really hurt her that even Ted had gone over to Sienna's side, which belonged to a family of villains. Gabriel hated her because this little girl had decided all her plans. It was clear in the priestess's eyes how she hated her and longed for the death of this little conceited girl. At this time, in Sienna's mansion, Ashid stood in front of her asking to meet Ted. Cian was extremely surprised by this event because she thought that Ashida would need more time. But the boy did not speak of forgiveness, he spoke only of meeting the Holy Knight. After all, he had heard that divine power could awaken near the bearer. Cian noticed how scared Ashida was, but he still went for it, which meant he became stronger. So the girl decided to praise the baby, which surprised him greatly. Cian also said that tomorrow they would go to the temple together and check everything properly. Ashid was touched. It was the first time someone had been so kind to him, so he couldn't say a word. But after some time, having come to his senses with a smile on his face, he thanked the lady. Cian loved the way Ashib was happy, like a village puppy wagging his tail from side to side. The maids who watched this were happy, but the father, noticing that Ashid and Cian had become closer, was not so happy. Having sent a message to the temple, the next day the holy knights were already waiting for them, who accompanied them to the hall to check for divine power. Matthias immediately asked where the holy knight Ted was now, but the guard said that he would not be able to meet with them today. This seemed strange to Cian, as she felt that Ted would cancel any plans for Ashida. But later they learned that Mr. Ted was accompanying the priestesses to tea. Cian immediately asked the name of the priestess that Mr. Ted was accompanying, to which she received Gabriella's answer. The little girl didn't think it was a coincidence. Perhaps the priestess had deliberately arranged everything so that Ted wouldn't see them. But Ashida didn't care about that so much, because first he wanted to pass the test for the presence of divine power. Cian regretted that it happened this way, because Ashid had just gathered all his determination into a fist and decided to meet his brother. Unexpectedly, the boy assumed that Cian was upset because she was only here to meet Ted. But suddenly, Cian replied that everything was fine because Ashid was next to her. These words seemed so warm and tender to Ashid that they touched not only his heart, but also his soul. They touched him so much that all his cheeks turned red with shame. And Cian, looking at the boy's face, wondered why Ashid was blushing so much. So I assumed that maybe he was afraid to undergo the test for divine power. To support him, Cian took Ashida's hand, thinking that this way she would calm him down. Ashid didn't understand Sienna's actions, but she continued to say that they would go like this all the way to the hall. Looking at her, he thought only about how much he wanted to protect his mistress. Matthias, who was demonstratively abandoned, was shocked by his daughter's actions. But only the priest and the person being tested could enter the testing room to see if Ashida had enough determination. Clenching his small hands into fists, he firmly answered, "Yes, I am ready." The doors closed, and now all that was left for Cian to do was wait for the results, worrying about Ashida. The next day, after Ashid passed the test for divine power, Cian was already sitting down for tea with Delphia. The woman was amazed at how quickly Cian invited her to tea because she thought she would have to wait at least a month. At this time, Cian was diligently trying to pour tea into her guest's cup. Having finished pouring the tea, she stirred the sugar with a spoon and pushed the mug towards her older sister Delphia. The young lady could not take her eyes off the baby, and as she took the black lemon tea, she thanked her. She didn't have any concerns because she believed that such a little girl couldn't have set a trap. But suddenly, Cian said that this tea was given to her by her grandmother. It sounded scary, to say the least. Delphia immediately looked up at the little girl, wondering if it was Duchess Raquel who had given her tea. Turning her attention to the spoon, Delphia noticed that it had changed color, meaning there was poison in it. Could it really be that simple? They poisoned her, an ordinary little girl, and had her wrapped around their finger. But Cian claimed that she could save Delphia because she had a weapon that could heal her. In return, Delphia had to give something to the baby, she said with a firm look. Cian asked for a piece of Delphia's power. Apparently it was a monocrystal that the young lady had. Her hands began to shake. Delphia felt the poison spreading throughout her body. There was no time to think. This little one, without a shadow of embarrassment, demands something from the one she just took and poisoned. As such a girl, maybe an ordinary 5-year-old, it seems Delphia made a mistake with Cian. She won't be able to play so easily. The woman experienced such a feeling for the first time, the feeling of love. Now she was ready to become Cian's subordinate. But the little girl refused. She wasn't particularly interested in this. Becoming a slave owner was unnecessary. Cian didn't intend to kill Delphia. She just wanted to weaken her a little so that she couldn't harm Matthias. It was obvious that Delphia was already feeling bad, but she sat there joyfully as she was ready to give even her life to Cian. The little girl found this behavior strange, as she expected Delphia to be angry. After a few seconds, the woman decided to take out her monocrystal from her chest and give it to Cian. The color of the single crystal is exactly like Delphia's hair, the little girl noted. Handing over the single crystal, the woman said that she had made a necklace out of it to make it more comfortable for Cian to wear. Delphia really didn't feel sorry to give it to Sienna, since she had already acknowledged her as her mistress. Taking the monocrystal in her hands, Cian was very surprised, as this feeling was unlike anything else. And Delphia continued to insist that Cian was now her mistress, which the little girl really didn't like. This obsession was unnecessary. After some time, Ashid, who was actually Cian's weapon, approached them. Since yesterday, this little one had become capable, and now he could help Cian with her chores. Yesterday, in the divine power testing room at the temple, Ashida was told to place his hand on the cube. The priest said that if the boy really did have divine power, the cube would light up. He also said that at that age, it is too late to expect divine power since it awakens earlier. That's why Ashid was worried a lot and was afraid that he wouldn't succeed. But still, he decided to stretch out his hand to the cube because he wanted to be useful to Mrs. Cian. And unexpectedly for the boy, the cube began to glow, although it was not so bright. The priest was surprised, although what could he say, since Ashid was Ted's brother? But a small amount of divine power can be possessed by many, so there is another test. Rosario, the so-called stage that will show how strong Ashid is, those who are fit for combat service, it glows red. And for those with especially strong strength, it glows gold. The priest also added that for useless people, this artifact glows white. All these words touched the boy because he was afraid of being useless. A lot of thoughts filled the child's head. He didn't want to go through the test. He was scared. Clenching his palms into fists, he didn't want to think that he was empty space. The darkness was consuming him. He wanted to give up right here and now, forgetting about what he came for. But suddenly, memories of Mrs. Sienna holding his hand, helping and supporting him, came into his head. The boy raised his head, determined to pass the test of strength. The first test of divine power was passed. The second test showed that the boy's divine power was weak. This is exactly what the priest wrote down in his report, which he would later show to the clergy. This should have been enough, when suddenly the light around the boy became brighter and the priest noticed it. Concentrating and taking the brooch in both hands, the boy began to emit a bright blue glow. The priest was amazed by this, as he did not expect that a boy who came at such an age would be so strong. But what struck the priest most was that the boy glowed a deep blue color. There are 4 types of divine power in total. Combat power is divided into defensive and offensive. Predictive in future priests or priestesses, they could see the future with their power. And finally, the healing one for those who would become a healer, they were all very valuable, because healers could heal even those who were on the verge of death. There were practically no such people, so the priest was incredibly surprised. He had only heard that when a person with the potential to become a healer picks up Rosario, it begins to glow a bright blue color. Now the baby realized that he really had the power to protect his mistress. Back to the present day, where Cian has sent Delphia to retrieve her monocrystal. Ashid had already extended his hands to the woman and began to heal her with divine power. Delphia didn't like this feeling. It was disgusting to her, but Cian insisted that the woman be patient. And since the mistress says so, Delphia will definitely endure it. How unusual it was for Sienna. After some time, Ashid reported that the purification was complete. He no longer felt the poison in Delphia's body. But who would have thought that Grandma's tea would turn out to be poison, since Cian just went to her for artifacts? What if someone finds out about this and wants revenge? It was necessary to protect the grandmother who is trying so hard for her granddaughter. Now Cian realized that she was wrong, and should have said that it was she who added the poison, not her grandmother. Delphia seemed to be completely indifferent. She was glad that her mistress had led her. The woman calls Cian this because she gave her power to her. And the heart, apparently too, Delphia made eyes at, really wanting to please Cien. Trembling with fear, the little girl insisted that she did not want to accept Delphia's heart. Coming closer, the woman asked if Cien would accept her heart if Delphia gave her a gift, in honor of the fact that Cien became her owner and friend, because adults can be friends with children. It sounded tempting, so Cien decided that if the gift was good, she would accept it. With a blush on her face, Delphia was glad that her gift would be accepted, so she said that she would send it tomorrow. The tea ceremony ended, evening came, the mansion of Duchess Rukella. Delphia was surprised, as she did not expect to be accepted into this mansion after everything. But the Duchess wasn't really expecting her either. She was simply interested in what this woman needed. Delphia wanted to find out who put poison in her cup, so she came to Rukella, to which Rukella replied that she would not be able to restrain herself if Delphia tried to kill the child. Did she really mean to say that it would be better for Delphia to die than for Cien? Not receiving an answer to this question, Delphia turned her back to the Duchess, wanting to thank her. After all, she really liked Cien and she was glad that she was able to meet her in person. So much so that Delphia even made a magic sphere for her, so now she's on a leash with Sienna. Rukella was unhappy about this, but she understood that Delphia was serious about this. Suddenly, Delphia noticed the servants whispering and talking about some kind of mead, and she realized that they were talking about the hostess. So Delphia began to laugh at Rukella, who calls her granddaughter Honey. Although they were enemies to each other, for the sake of Sienna they wanted peace. The next day came, it was calm and relaxed. The butler brought the gift that Delphia had spoken of. It looked like a small bag. The maids immediately began to be cautious, wanting to protect their mistress, but she stopped them. And when the little girl opened her gift, she saw a little goblin in a cage. Although the maids were against it, Cien was happy with such a gift. The girl decided that she would raise him as her pet. Hearing the noise, Matthias immediately showed interest, wanting to know the reason. Noticing her dad, the little girl immediately rushed to tell him what kind of gift it was. She immediately began to joyfully shout that it was her aunt who gave such a cool gift to Cien. The men were immediately stunned. Delphia Mermaid was a good aunt. Matthias didn't even understand where to start being shocked. Having told about this, the little girl immediately ran to write a letter to her beloved aunt. When Cien finished writing it, she held it up for everyone to read, hoping that Lady Delphia would like it. But Matthias, like his mother, didn't like the fact that Delphia was paying too much attention to Cien. While the adults were thinking about their own things, Cien was only glad that she was able to gather such strong personalities around her.